listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Breaking news, the Taliban offer to take over West Ham United has been referred to the Football Association panel for these matters. So it'll be waved through. I'm joking, of course, but only just. I may just be being premature. After the bone-saw massacre merchants of the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund were permitted to take over Newcastle United just this week. As a matter of fact, little noticed except by me, who tried to make a documentary about it. The Saudi royal family already owned an English Premiership club, Sheffield United, last season. It hasn't gone well for them. Will it go better for Newcastle United? And Scottish independence. It was the comedian Jim Davidson who put it to me that the crowds disappear one row at a time. Well, they're disappearing far faster than that in the Scottish independence campaign. We'll be talking about Donald Trump on the stump raising $100 million before he's even declared that he is in the race. And we'll be talking about all things British, Special K, Keir Starmer amongst them. We'll be on all platforms, the usual ones. I'll adumbrate right after this, but it is indeed the mother of all talk shows with an audience of 1 million people. Glad you're here.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Episode 121. The last episode, like several others before it, achieved an audience of more than 1 million people throughout the week. There's nothing on British television or on European television or on North American television that comes anything close to that kind of audience. So you are in a select band of the smartest people on the planet. If you're watching as well as listening on my Facebook page, then please press share now to confound Mr. Algorithm, who's forever lurking in the corridors. If you're watching on my YouTube channel, please subscribe if you are, or on RT's multiple YouTube channels. A big welcome to you if you are one of those back now on Instagram, on Twitch, on Telegram, on all these different visual platforms. A very big welcome to you. But if you are listening on radio, on 105.5 in the Washington, D.C. area, you'll be listening in crystal clarity on FM. And if you're listening on AM, coast to coast across the United States, again, a big welcome to you. It's a jam-packed show tonight. For obvious reasons, there's a lot happening in the world. Some of it sublime, some of it ridiculous. Let's start with the ridiculous. There's a fit and proper person test before you can take over a British, or for that matter, European football club. And some pretty rum characters have passed that test. And just to make it clear, that there's nothing anti-Arab or anti-Muslim about what I'm going to say. I cannot understand how Roman Abramovich has been allowed to own Chelsea for all these years, not least because the British authorities don't seem keen to allow him even into the country to watch them. I don't know why American billionaires were allowed to take over my club, Manchester United, dumping shares this week before the Newcastle United takeover news broke and everybody else's share price fell markedly. They dumped hundreds of millions of dollars worth of their own shares, still retaining overall control of the company, of course. The share price of Manchester United has fallen significantly, so the Glazers managed to sell just in time. A remarkable coincidence. I don't know why other American billionaires are able to own a great working class Northern English institution like Liverpool Football Club. I was literally alone. I could not find anybody interested in the news last season that a member of the Saudi royal family had bought full control of Sheffield United Football Club in the English Premiership. So there's a whole lot of hypocrisy. These are not the only levels of hypocrisy involved in the hue and cry from liberal journalists and the commentariat about the Saudi royal family now buying for £305 million the great national institution of Newcastle United. There's a lot of hypocrisy because most of these commentators have had nothing to say about the examples I've already given. And virtually all of them will be at the sports washing fiesta next year in Qatar when the World Cup is transferred there to the Middle East, to the Persian Gulf, where it's baking hot for the first time in history. And the attitudes of the countries in the Persian Gulf are not dissimilar to the attitudes of the Saudi Arabian dictatorship, although maybe by degree. And that degree may very well prove critical in the course of the debate that we're going to have this evening on this subject. The Saudi royal family is one thing, Prince Mohammed bin Salman quite another. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has been found guilty by the whole of the international community, including their best friends in the United States, including from their best friend, Donald J. Trump, to be a murderer, a mutilator. Literally. Prince MBS, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, has been found by the United States government to have personally been involved in the murder of a journalist of the Washington Post in their own consulate in Istanbul in Turkey. They didn't just lure him to the embassy. They didn't just murder him. They then literally sawed him into little pieces and refuse even now that they have admitted that he was murdered on their premises to say what they did with his remains. And the international community has fairly and squarely blamed the man who now owns Newcastle United for a crime heinous in the extreme. It's not the only crime, of course, of which he's guilty. He's guilty of far bigger crimes in Syria, in Yemen, against his own people, against even his own relatives, whom he hanged upside down in a 7-star hotel until the money fell out of their pockets and he filched it, all in the name of an anti-corruption drive, of course. I would argue that this puts MBS in a different league, if you'll forgive the pun, from all of the others that have strangely passed the fit and proper person test to own a British football club. Now, I didn't oppose this takeover because of the hypocrisy involved. After all, if MBS is so bad, why are we selling him weapons? If MBS is so bad, why are we sending military officers to help him prosecute his war against the people next door in Yemen? If MBS is so bad, how come he's allowed to invest in all kinds of other, some of them very surprising, enterprises in Britain, in America, and across Europe? And if a Saudi royal can own Sheffield United without anyone saying a word against it, how can you stop the people of Newcastle from breaking free of their own local autocrat, the owner that has just been bought out? The people of Newcastle have suffered a lot under the previous ownership of the football club, but they are now owned by people who are exponentially more wealthy than the owners of any football club in the world. The owners of Manchester City, from the tyrannical United Arab Emirates, are worth 22 billion, a lot of money in anybody's money, anybody's language. But the people who've now bought Newcastle United are worth 700 billion pounds. By a long stretch, Newcastle United are now richer than all the other football teams in the world put together, which is going to, well, alter the course, some might say distort the course of football, the working class game that we exported to the world very considerably indeed. So there are many aspects to this, and we're asking in a poll, it's already out there, should countries, should foreign entities be allowed to buy football clubs at all? My answer is no, because football is more than a business. As we discovered during the lockdown, football is an essential part of national life, not just in our country here in Britain, but in many countries around the world. If war is too important to be left to generals, then football is too important to be left to billionaire owners thousands of miles away, many of whom are not even sure of the shape of the ball the people they employ are kicking. There'll be much debate on this in the course of the next 3 hours. We'll be talking to a knight of the realm and a Nobel Prize winner. It's not often that a show can say that. Professor Sir John Curtice is the Dean of Psephologists, the Prince of Polls. There's nothing about the movements of public opinion that he does not study and form a very considered, scientifically calibrated view about. Having said that, I have frequently doubted if he was right in his calibration of the level of support for the breakup of the United Kingdom. As it happens, the polls have begun to turn in favour of my side of the argument. And as I said earlier in Jim Davidson's immortal words, you look down and the audience begins to disappear over the years, row by row. 326 people marched in the city of Glasgow on Saturday in what was billed as the capital letters Big March for Scottish independence. 326. Only a couple of years ago, these campaigners were claiming six-figure sums, six-figure numbers for the attendance at their events. We'll hear what Sir John thinks about the prospects for Scottish separatism. We'll be talking to RT's own, the awesome Afshin Rattansi, on the Pandora's box that we first lifted last weekend. You'll remember it was just an hour or so before we came on air that the news dropped across the world about a new Pandora's box. After the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, along came the Pandora's box. Now, there were a number of things that were suspicious automatically about the Pandora's box. Although 300 politicians were fingered, all of them deservedly, and I hope they all go to hell as a result. But they were 300 politicians from a certain part of the world, or a certain relationship to the United States and the power in the Western world. No American politicians or businessmen were found in the Pandora's box. A remarkable state of affairs, you might say. And very few British politicians or businessmen were found in the Pandora's box either. But one in particular was. Tony Blair, the former Middle East peace envoy, to his amazement, his total surprise, turned out to have purchased a company offshore from an unknown party who turned out to be the now deceased former Prime Minister of Bahrain. Neither the Prime Minister of Bahrain nor Mr. Blair knew that they were buying and selling to and from each other. And Mr. Blair was then the proud owner of a multi-million-pound property in the Marylebone Road on which he avoided £312,000 in British taxation. That's the British taxation that pays, amongst other things, for the Metropolitan Police. That's the Metropolitan Police who, for the last 15 years nearly, have been paying every penny of the personal protection of the very same Tony Blair, who's guarded round the clock by officers of the Metropolitan Police, paid for by the taxpayer, whom the Blairs have just, entirely legally, of course, cheated out of £312,000. Angry? Moi? And we'll be talking about Donald Trump and somebody called Keir Starmer. Special K, he called himself. Special Agent K, maybe. Although he actually didn't say that, or he did say it, but he didn't mean it. It was a joke, and then it wasn't a joke. The mask has well and truly slipped off the face of Sir Keir Starmer, and the opinion polls prove it. And if I've got the chance, I'll ask Professor Sir John Curtice about that. And not least, the noble art of giving out Nobel Prizes. Satire died, of course, when Henry Kissinger was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. It died again, if you can die twice, when Barack Obama was given the award, and given it before he'd even begun work as the United States President. I'm not sure who'll get the Nobel Peace Prize next. Maybe the owner of Newcastle United. Who knows? Stranger things have happened, but we will be talking to a real pucker Nobel Prize winner for chemistry. And I understand everything about his work, but I'll ask him to explain it to you in layman's terms. Layman's terms, layperson's terms, for the benefit of British Airways. It's all coming up over the next 2 hours and 40 minutes. Phone lines are open, by the way. Shall I give you the numbers? If you're in the United Kingdom, it's 08081 965522. If you're in the United States, it's +1 844 944 3344. In both cases, to call and get on the air is absolutely free. You can also email the show at onair@moats.tv. And of course, you can tweet me, as many of you do. Let me read you the poll. Should countries / foreign entities be allowed to buy football clubs? A, yes. B, no. C, depends which country. Get voting now on my Twitter feed, on my Instagram, on my YouTube, and on my Telegram channel. Okay, here's my general knowledge question. The world's first major nuclear accident happened on this day in 1957. 57. Where did it occur? A, Japan. B, the United States. C, Britain. That's a hard one. Give you the answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
The podcast had another incredible week with a rise of 14% in total downloads. That's on top of last week's 10% increase, making us not only one of the fastest growing political programs on screens and on radio, but now in podcasts too. We're now one of the top political podcasts, not just in the UK, but also in Switzerland, Japan, Germany, Thailand, Taiwan, and believe it or not, the UAE. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts, and remember to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And why not leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts? If you're a Spotify user, please follow us and share with your friends so more people can enjoy Moats.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
The world's first major nuclear accident happened on this day in 1957 in Britain, in Windscale in Britain. Only those of you of a certain age can remember it. Professor Sir John Curtice, as I said, is the Prince of Poles. He is the Dean of Psephologists, and we're always very, very happy to see him on the mother of all talk shows. Professor, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's a jam-packed set of polling numbers that we can crunch, isn't it? We'll turn to the Scottish in a minute, but I wanted your expert view on how the party conference season went for the leaders of the big British parties. There was no real bounce for anybody. It looked that way to me, at least.
No, that so far at least seems the picture. Obviously, we could argue you might need another week before we really know what the fallout is, but certainly the polls that we've had during the course of the conference season haven't shown a great deal of difference. That does mean that basically the Conservatives are still around 5 points ahead of Labour, 40 for the Conservatives, around 35 for Labour. The Liberal Democrats still bumping around slightly higher than they were. They're kind of running at around the 9% mark, but only just ahead of the Greens. And what's left of the Brexit Party, now known as Reform UK, probably just around 3 or 4 points. But it's not obvious any of that's moved. Now, one thing one should bear in mind at this point, I mean, you might say, oh, Conservatives 5 points ahead, so Boris is still in a comfortable position. Well, actually, he isn't, because a 5-point lead, given the current electoral geography, probably only about a 50% chance of a Conservative majority. And one of the things we're going to have to remember as we look forward to the next UK general election, which sure isn't due until 2024, but might happen in 2023, is that the Conservatives don't have any friends left inside the House of Commons. and that unless the Conservatives get an overall majority or something very close to it, then Boris Johnson will probably be out on his ear. One suspects that not even the DUP would be willing to sustain a minority Conservative administration in the future. So although the task facing the Labour Party to get an overall majority is an enormous one, they have to be about 12 points ahead. Once the Conservative lead falls behind 5 points, the Conservatives may themselves no longer have an overall majority, and they may well find that they can form an administration, albeit at a price that we might come on to, even though they have many fewer seats than the Conservatives, because frankly, the Liberal Democrats, they don't want to keep the Conservatives in power. The SNP, they don't want to keep the Conservatives in power. And as already said, the DUP probably also don't want to keep the Conservatives in power. So the next election is going to be a very unbalanced contest. And while the poll numbers look good for the Conservatives, they actually have to be very good for the Conservatives for them to be sure of winning another overall majority.
What does a very good look like, Professor? I mean, you've used the 5% number. I know why. The latest poll is 5%, but they have been as much as 9%. At what point does 5%, 50% chance of an overall majority, become a more or less stuck-on overall majority?
Once you get to about 7 points or so, then the Conservatives are almost bound to win an overall majority unless something fairly dramatic happens. Of course, I think one thing one should say, George, I mean, it's kind of started this conversation by saying, well, the party conference season hasn't made much difference. True. One thing that may have made a difference, but it's early days yet, is the spike in gas prices, the shortages in the shops, the petrol shortage. Certainly intriguingly, one poll, and I think one should emphasize at this stage, it's only one poll from YouGov, finds that the Conservatives at the moment, at least, are no more likely to be trusted on handling the economy than are the Labour Party. Now, if that were something that were persist, then the Labour Party might begin to get a look in on, one of the things that so far, despite the fact that people are more likely to think that Sir Keir Starmer might perhaps look like a Prime Minister than Jeremy Corbyn, though they still have been less likely to think that Sir Keir Starmer would do a better job than Boris Johnson. But the Labour Party also not really convincing people they could run the economy any more effectively. If the headwinds on the economy, the kind of headwinds that people are beginning to notice in their everyday lives, if they are to continue and that people don't get convinced that the Conservatives are capable of handling them, then frankly, that might end up causing the Conservatives much more difficulty than many deaths, indeed many people's views, far too many deaths over coronavirus in the previous 18 months never really did.
There's always the possibility of changing jockey mid-race, of course. Conservatives are quite ruthless in that, Labour less so, at least until recent times. The leader, Starmer, and the leader, Johnson, might become, in the case of Starmer, it's already the case, I think, might become less popular than their party, which is usually a cue for a coup.
Sure. I mean, at the moment, the Boris Johnson's relationship with his party is somewhat volatile. At the moment, nobody feels able to second guess him. He seems to be dominant. Of course, it was a few months ago during the height of the coronavirus pandemic that people were saying that Boris Johnson wasn't enjoying the job. Maybe he might go. Now, the mood music at present has completely changed. But, I mean, there is no doubt that I think, Boris Johnson's leadership of his party is predicated on his poll lead. He's got his poll lead at the moment, and therefore he's got his party behind him. And I think certainly, one of the things, again, the party conference season reminded, I mean, whatever one thinks about the arguments of either Sir Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson at the end of the day has two crucial attributes. So one, he's got charisma, and two, he knows how to construct a narrative and to sell it. So, we've got this narrative, for good or ill, which is, sure, there are difficulties now about aspects of our economy, but this is the transition from Brexit. And they were trying to wean big business off being too reliant on immigration. And when this works, everybody's wages will go up, and as a result, we'll all be much better off. And, it's a very clever narrative. So in a sense, it's getting Brexit done, it's getting Brexit finished. Sir Keir Starmer, very thoughtful speech, a rather long speech. He tried to tell people about himself with a degree of success. He was particularly selling not only his own background, where he's trying to persuade us that he had at least a skilled working class background that perhaps many people could understand. Also, quite intriguingly, selling the fact that he was a criminal lawyer and was responsible for prosecuting people, to say, I'm tough on crime, clearly trying to imitate Tony Blair here. And then, kind of said, well, here are 4 words that sum me up. And it was work and care and security. One other I frankly still can't remember. But what was missing? Well, what was missing was the catchphrase, the phrase that enabled to encapsulate for people in a few words what was Sir Keir Starmer is about. And until he can think of the catchphrase in order to encapsulate his ideas, then I think, frankly, he's still going to be struggling. But, we'll see. He was trying. It was an interesting speech, but on its own, certainly wasn't sufficient.
Now, turning to Scotland, Sir John, you know where I stand on it, but in the course of this interview, I shall be entirely dispassionate, except in this regard. As a keen observer of nationalism's ups and downs, I was active in politics when Winnie Ewing broke through for the first time in the 1960s. This looks like a down period to me, and one in which infighting and stresses and strains inside the nationalist movement looks likely to get more virulent still. How does it look to you?
Well, you're right. There is a degree of dissension within the nationalist movement. But it's one, of course, that's essentially being articulated by Alex Salmond and the Alba Party. But in the end, the Alba Party didn't make any breakthrough last May. They've probably only got about 2 or 3% support. Now, I know they do reflect the views of a section of society in Scotland that is impatient about the fact that Nicola Sturgeon hasn't called the referendum already, and feel that they should be pushing the independence button sooner rather than later. I have to say to you that my reading of public opinion in Scotland, here crucially, my reading of those people who would vote yes in an independence referendum, which is roughly half of Scotland, most of whom voted for the SNP or some of them for the Greens on the list vote, is that actually they're inclined to be relatively patient. Virtually all of them want a referendum at some point during the course of the next 5 years. But quite a few of them are saying, well, as long as it's sometime within the next 5 years, that's fine. It doesn't certainly have to be this year, probably doesn't even have to be next year. And I think to that extent, at least, Nicola Sturgeon's probably got quite a lot of leeway. And it's frankly leeway that she needs, because where are the polls at the moment? Probably about 51% for no, 49% for yes. Therefore, going early is not in Nicola Sturgeon's interest, because a referendum would be an enormous gamble. It's also, by the way, not in Boris Johnson's interest, because an early referendum would be an enormous gamble for him, because frankly, we do not know what the outcome of an independence referendum would be if it was held relatively soon. And of course, the truth is that an awful lot has changed since 2014, and both sides, both nationalists and unionists, have an awful lot of homework to do to work out what their arguments are going to be for and against independence in a world that's frankly been changed by Brexit. Brexit has certainly changed the character of support for independence. One of the ironies of the 2014 referendum is that although we spent hours arguing about whether or not an independent Scotland could be a continuing member of the European Union, attitudes towards the EU proved to be utterly unrelated to whether or not people voted for independence. Those days are over. As a consequence of Brexit, supporters of people who want to be inside the European Union, it's now very clearly a majority who want independence, But Leave voters, in contrast, support for independence has fallen away. So that Brexit and independence have now become intertwined, but Brexit has changed the argument. There's going to be an argument about what do you do about the single market border, given that an independent Scotland would want to rejoin the European Union. What do we do about that? But equally, how do unionists argue that it's better for Scotland to be in a relatively small single market, which is the United Kingdom, as opposed to being in a much bigger single market, which is the European Union? So we are now looking at a very different choice that the Scottish voters face. I think it's a major geostrategic choice, but it's one that requires both sides to think through their arguments once more, because the arguments that they used in 2014, for the most part, have been overtaken by events, not least the change in position on oil. Though, of course, the price of oil has gone back up, but nobody wants to use oil anymore. Not even the S&P wants to use oil. So we're talking about what do we do in a world that's trying to deal with climate change, and what do we do in a world that's now been changed by Brexit? That requires both sides to rethink their arguments, and we've not really had that argument yet, and therefore we don't really know what voters will make of it.
Now, when you give these numbers, knife-edge numbers, 51-49, does that exclude don't knows? And if it does...
Yeah, sure. That leaves aside the don't knows, but to be honest, there aren't that many don't knows.
But it is true, isn't it, Professor, that in 2014, the don't knows broke very heavily for remaining in the United Kingdom by some factor.
I'm not sure that's true, George. I mean, at the end of the day, the story of the 2014 referendum is that although the Yes side didn't win the referendum, they certainly won the campaign. I mean, probably if the referendum ballot had been held back in October 2013, when the ballot was agreed, it might have been a 2-1 vote for staying inside the UK, and in the end it ended up 55-45. So I'm not sure you're right. And in the end, the truth is that most people had a pretty clear view. The polls slightly overestimated the vote for yes in the end, but polls were saying about 53-47. We only ever had one or two polls that ever had yes ahead. It always looked pretty clear that yes, we're going to win, and yes, indeed did. Sorry, that no, we're going to win, and in the end, no, indeed, duly did win.
I don't want to dwell on the 2014 because, as you say, a lot has changed, but it was the biggest turnout there has ever been.
Absolutely.
In a vote in Scotland. It was on the date with the question, with the franchise, picked by the separatist side, and they still lost by 10 clear points. But you really think it's gotten closer? You see, I think it's gotten wider, I think.
And George, it's Brexit what's changed it, all right? Virtually all of the increase in support for independence is accounted for by the fact that there are some people who've switched from yes to no. So there are some people who voted leave, and around 1 in 3 of those people who voted yes in 2014 voted in favour of leaving the European Union. But people who voted no and leave are considerably outnumbered by about 2-1 by people who voted no and remain. And some of them have switched to yes. And because they're much more numerous, it was almost inevitable in the long run that the pursuit of Brexit was going to undermine support for the Union. And that is what has happened. Support for, basically, I can account for virtually all the increase in support for independence, which basically transpired in 2019 as we were arguing about whether or not Brexit should be implemented or not. Basically, all of it can be accounted for by the rise in support for independence amongst Remain voters. And I know, George, you're a backer of Brexit, but the truth is, anybody who wishes Scotland to remain inside the Union, who pursued Brexit, simply has to recognise that support for Scotland remaining inside the United Kingdom has been a piece of collateral damage for that cause, which, during the referendum campaign, if it ever happens, is something that the Unionist side will have to try to do its best to repair.
All of this, of course, may be entirely academic because in the course of this Parliament, this Prime Minister is not going to permit another referendum. The prospects of an illegal referendum or persuading the courts to allow a referendum notwithstanding the opposition of the government took a setback, didn't they, this week past, when ultra vires was a phrase suddenly remembered again. The Supreme Court deciding that the Scottish Government was doing things that it had no power to do. Yeah,
you're quite right. There was a Supreme Court case this day that struck down a couple of bills that actually were passed unanimously by the Scottish Parliament, or at least it struck down certain provisions of those bills. In particular, what upset the Supreme Court were some clauses that said that in future acts of Parliament should be interpreted in such a way that were consistent with the legislation that was passed by Holyrood. And perhaps it wasn't a great surprise that the Supreme Court said, no, that definitely breaks the terms of the Scotland Act. The right to, the UK Parliament, the right to legislate in devolved matters, and therefore you cannot do this. Now, I think what's also true, if the Scottish Parliament were to attempt to implement a referendum of the kind that was in October 2014, then again, I think almost undoubtedly that would be ruled as ultra vires. But the interesting question is what would happen if the Scottish Parliament come up with something different? And way back in the days of the minority administration of 2007 to 2011, they came up with the idea of asking a referendum which said, do you think that the Scottish government should enter into negotiations with the UK government with a view to Scotland becoming independent? And shall we say, when 2 or 3 public lawyers were gathered together to debate as to whether or not this would be ultra vires, we got 5 or 6 different opinions. And the truth is, we don't know. I think most public lawyers think probably the court would strike it down, but it probably isn't as clear
a clear and obvious error, I think he was about to say. Shall I go to my second question? What did Ronald Reagan declare war on in 1982? A, the Democrats, B, drugs, C, Grenada, or all three? Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Here? Where am I?
Welcome to St. Peter's Gate, my son.
Is this one of that Hillary's tricks, that devil?
Be still, my son. The Clintons cannot hurt you here. You are safe with me in heaven.
Oh, heck. Knew I shouldn't have taken Bob's homemade vaccine. Oh, Lord have mercy, I am not worthy.
Before you pass on, you may ask any question you desire.
Anything?
With my omniscient knowledge, I can tell you anything you wish to know.
Well, Lord, you gotta tell me. All-powerful creator of this universe, before you judge me, I've been searching for answers my whole life.
Yes, my child.
I have to know. Who shot JFK?
Another one. It was a lone gunman by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. He was not a government agent, and there was no second shooter on that grassy knoll in Dallas.
My God! This goes higher up than we thought!
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Ronald Reagan declared war in 1982 on drugs, although he definitely was at war with the Democrats and he invaded Grenada. He was at war with the people of Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, and many, many others over the course of his administration. Now, should countries, foreign entities, be allowed to buy football clubs? Yes, 26%, quite high actually. No, 58%. And C, it depends which country, 16%. So you can vote on Twitter, on YouTube, and on Telegram. Now, Dr. Anas Altikriti is an old friend of mine. We don't see eye to eye on everything. I wonder if we'll see eye to eye on the Saudi Arabian purchase of Newcastle United. Let's find out. Dr. Anas, very nice to see you again.
Hello, George. It's been a while.
Yes. Where do you stand on the Saudi takeover?
Well, firstly, I'm pleased for the Newcastle United fans who have gotten rid of Mike Ashley after years of campaigning for his riddance. But at the same time, it actually breaks my heart that almost to the day on the 3rd anniversary of the chopping up of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi at the orders of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, this comes through. And, you know, it's something that I do not wish to burden any Newcastle United fan with. But the sale, the en masse sale of virtually every single industry, to regimes as horrid and as terrible as the Saudi one is something that we need to actually sit up and take notice of, whether it be our high streets, whether it be our shopping malls, whether it be our industry, whether it be, the entertainment business, whether it be WWE, the worldwide wrestling, whether it be boxing, whether it be concerts. And obviously now we have what is in the life of every Brit, the crown jewels, the football clubs, the stadia. We have in North London the Emirates Stadium. We have in Eastern Manchester the Etihad Stadium, and we have clubs that are owned by probably private funds, but which are chaired by the likes of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So it's something that actually breaks my heart because of the time of it and because of the manner of it.
There's no private involved, is there, in the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund? Saudi Arabia is controlled by MBS, and therefore Saudi's Sovereign Wealth Fund is controlled ipso facto by him. He might even try to name the stadium after himself. It doesn't have a sponsor like the Emirates and so on. But before we come back to Newcastle, let's talk about the others. The UAE, I read today, was tapping your telephone and your sister's telephone. The UAE is a brutal, tyrannical government. But nobody ever talks about them owning Manchester City in the way that they are talking about the Saudis owning Newcastle United. Why this double standard, do you think?
Well, I can only guess, but obviously what's at stake is a relationship that involves jobs, involves contracts to the tunes of tens, probably hundreds of billions. We're talking about very powerful lobbies, George. I'm pretty sure that you know of this. There are people who are in the pay of some of these regimes. Obviously, one of the most prominent of those is Tony Blair. and who work as advisors and who work for these public funds or private funds, even as consultants and the like, and they are paid, bucket loads of money that none of us, I'm going to presume, none of your listeners today can even fathom or imagine having within their possession. So the fact of the matter is that regardless of human rights, regardless of democracy, regardless of equality, regardless of tolerance, leave aside all of that. All of those are they're just buzzwords that unfortunately our politicians it rolls off their tongues, but it actually has no resonance in reality, because once it comes to it, money, wealth, profit making is far, far more important than any of that. And regardless of how horrid, how the entire world was shocked at not only the way, but the form and manner and brazen format of how Jamal Khashoggi was assassinated in the Saudi embassy or Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2017, 2018. It now is seemingly is a distant memory, and we're more than willing, more than happy to invite tens, probably hundreds of billions into the country via Newcastle United Football Club, but which will be used in order to, what the term is, sport wash the record of MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and the Saudi regime. It's something that is something that I regard as quite shameful and quite disgraceful. And once again, I don't wish to burden this to any Newcastle United, long-suffering Newcastle United fan, but it's something that must rest quite heavily on our shoulders.
Yes, I mean, it was the football authorities and then ultimately the British government that allowed this to go through. And you can see why, not just for the reasons you mentioned, very ably, but these people, after they leave office, are up to their necks in the filthy lucre generated in these places. You mentioned Tony Blair. Mrs. Blair, it turns out, is the legal representative of the company that makes the spyware that is probably now listening into this conversation. And was listening in to your own telephone. But when you think about it, isn't this the bottom line? If bin Salman's so bad, why is the British government selling weapons to him? Why are we giving him military, political, diplomatic assistance and cover of all kinds? If he's so bad, why is he allowed to invest in Hollywood, in Disney, in media, even in some media that most people would think at a glance was scarcely the kind of media that he'd be involved in. So it's not fair, is it, to put the blame, the responsibility of all of this on Newcastle United?
Oh, I absolutely agree. Absolutely. And I think that we long sold down. I think that it's been now, years, probably 10, 15 years since we went down this very, very slippery slope whereby industry, entertainment, media is up for sale. And now we're, up to our necks in quite filthy and quite unspeakable deals and kinds of trade that, in all honesty, if under the glory of sunlight, wouldn't be accepted by any sane human being. But it just goes to show, George, and I think that this is something that will come to bite us quite hard. And I talk here about ourselves, me, you, everyone listening today, unless we decide absolutely where we stand on issues that are of essential morality and efficacy. Where do we stand on human life? Where do we stand on corruption? Where do we stand on democracy or dictatorships? Where do we stand on violence? Where do we stand on all of these things? Unless we are absolutely unequivocally and unconditionally clear as to where we stand, we're almost always going to be up for sale. Everything, including ourselves. So yes, you're absolutely right. It's unfair to now pile in on Newcastle United and their long-suffering supporters when actually parts of government, one could even argue, have been effectively sold to lobby groups and interest groups that represent the likes of the Saudi regime, the UAE regime, and others that have mega billions. So it's something that we need to really address quite seriously, look ourselves in the mirror. And when we then talk down to others, talking to them, trying to preach to them about democracy, human rights, and equality, that would become quite a difficult conversation to have.
Dr. Marx, of course, predicted that in this period of capitalism, all that is sacred will be profaned, all that is solid will melt into air. It was remarkably prescient. Last words from you, Doctor. Is MBS solid in the saddle in Saudi Arabia? One recalls the mass arrests of many people, including his relatives, the extortion of money from those relatives, alleged to have stolen that money in the first place, was billed as an anti-corruption drive. Is there any possible constellation inside Saudi Arabia that might actually wake up one morning and decide they don't want to be led by this man?
I wish, George, that I can say yes to that. But unfortunately, this regime, and the MBS particularly, is so brutal that any kind of sign, any whiff of any opposition to his regime is met with the utmost brutality. It's something that might surprise many people, but the thing that really bugs MBS is not the fact that people are speaking of him having ordered the butchering of Jamal Khashoggi. This might actually be a badge of honor that he wears quite openly. The fact that really bugs him is that he and his ilk, they're all for show. And what really bothers him is that he can't summer in France or spend, time in London or go to Washington, D.C., because governments, whilst doing deals under the table and sometimes over the table with him, but they don't want to take pictures with him. They don't want to seem as though they are siding with someone who has such an ill reputation. And that to him is what really bothers him. The fact that he's known to have ordered the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, in fact, the imprisonment of thousands of his countrymen, including some of his family members, as you mentioned, is something which doesn't bother him, not to even a jot. That's not a problem to him. So unfortunately, as we sit today, and whilst I personally believe that such rules will come to an end and will come to a gruesome end, not just a sort of peaceful walking into the sunset sort of end, but quite a gruesome end, I can't really put my finger on anything that I can mention and say, this is where it's going to come from. I hope there's something that I am unaware of. I just don't know of it.
Dr. Anas Altikriti, CEO and founder of the Cordoba Foundation, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Should countries, foreign entities be allowed to buy football clubs? Yes, 25, no, 63. C depends which country. That's down 4. Quite interesting, actually. Get voting on my YouTube, on my Telegram, and on my Twitter. Now, coming up after the news, it is the one and only Afshin Rattansi. We're opening the Pandora's box and talking to a Nobel Prize winner for chemistry, Dr. David McMillan of Princeton University. But first, before all of that, it's the news with Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
Britain's business secretary has said he is convinced the UK will not suffer gas shortages in the coming months and insisted that a price cap on consumers' energy bills will not be moved this winter. Kwasi Kwarteng said he was convinced that we will have full energy supply, he said, despite soaring wholesale gas prices around the world. Although he stopped short of offering a full guarantee that there would not be disruption. He went on to claim that he was in talks with Chancellor Rishi Sunak's team on possible further support for businesses facing higher bills, but a Treasury source said later that they are not involved in any talks and added that it wasn't the first time that Kwarteng had, quote, made things up in interviews. The UK is facing an uncertain winter with the spread of the coronavirus and the flu, the head of the Health Security Agency, Jenny Harries, has said. She said that people are at more significant risk of death and of serious illness if they are co-infected with both viruses. More than 40 million people in the UK are being offered a flu jab this year. For the first time, this includes all secondary school children up to the age of 16. The over 50s and younger adults with health conditions are also being offered a COVID booster jab this autumn and winter. UK demands over the Northern Ireland Protocol could cause a breakdown in relations with the EU, Ireland's foreign minister has warned. Simon Coveney made the comments after the UK reiterated that it just wants the European Court of Justice removed from oversight of the deal. Coveney said in his Twitter posting that this was the creation of a new red line which the EU cannot move on. The EU will bring forward proposals on Wednesday for reforming the protocol, which will focus on easing practical problems with the movement of goods from Britain to Northern Ireland rather than changing oversight arrangements. Lord Frost later responded to Mr Coveney on social media saying that he would prefer, quote, not to do negotiations on Twitter, but that the issue of governance and the ECJ is not new. People have to get used to higher food prices, the boss of Kraft Heinz has said. Miguel Patricio said the international food giant, which makes tomato sauce and baked beans, was putting up its prices in several countries. Unlike previous years, he said inflation was across the board. The rising cost of ingredients such as cereals and oil has pushed global food prices to a 10-year high, according to the UN World Food Organization. Kraft Heinz has increased prices on more than half of its products in the US, its home market, and Patricio admitted that it's happening elsewhere too. Taiwan will not bow to pressure from China and will defend its democratic way of life, President Tsai Ing-wen has said in a defiant speech amid heightened tensions over the island. She said, quote, the more we achieve, the greater the pressure we face from China. Her speech on Taiwan's National Day came after China's President Xi Jinping vowed to fulfill reunification. Taiwan considers itself a sovereign state, while China views it as a breakaway province. Beijing has also not ruled out the possible use of force to achieve unification. Tsai was re-elected by a landslide last year on a promise to stand up to Beijing. In her speech today, she said Taiwan was, quote, standing on democracy's first line of defence. She said the island would not act rashly, but would bolster its defences to ensure, she said, that nobody can force Taiwan to take the path China has laid out for us. That path she described as neither a free and democratic way of life for Taiwan nor sovereignty for its 23 million people. She also repeated an offer to talk with Chinese leaders on an equal footing, a suggestion Beijing, which brands her as a separatist, has so far rejected. Police in Guatemala have rescued 126 migrants who were abandoned inside a shipping container at the side of a road. They were found at dawn between the towns of Nueva Concepcion and Gonzales after locals reported hearing screams inside the trailer. Authorities believe they were abandoned by smugglers who had been paid to take them to the US via Mexico. More than 100 of those discovered are from the crisis-hit nation of Haiti. 40 small boats with 1,115 migrants on board have crossed the Channel in 2 days, the UK's Home Office has said. On Saturday, Border Force picked up 491 migrants on 17 boats, while the French authorities prevented 114 people from making the crossing. On Friday, 624 people crossed on 23 boats, with 300 more being stopped by French authorities. In September, 3,879 made the crossing. More migrants crossed than any other in previous months since the crisis began. More than 18,000 people have made the crossing from France to England in small boats so far this year, compared to just over 8,460 in 2020, according to Home Office figures. And finally, messing around with porridge is likely to induce apoplexy in a Scots man or woman, and the rest of us don't stray far from adding raisins and berries to flavour it. But now a savoury dish containing mushrooms and white wine has won this year's World Porridge Making Championship and been awarded the Golden Spurtle. A spurtle, for those who don't know, is an ancient wooden tool used to stir the porridge. Other ingredients in the oat arancini made by 25-year-old Dutch food blogger Miriam Groot included vegetable stock, lemon zest and pepper. Arancini are stuffed Italian rice balls that are coated in breadcrumbs and deep fried. In hers, Groot used pinhead oatmeal instead of rice. The competition is usually held in the Scottish Highland village of Carbridge, but those taking part in the virtual, usually Golden Spurtle, of 2021 were asked to submit footage of themselves making a favourite oat dish online. Groot's online blog, for anyone interested in her recipes, is called The Veggie Reporter. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Almost a quarter of you think that foreign countries, foreign entities should be allowed to buy football clubs. That is surprising to me. But anyway, what do I know? I've only been involved in football for the grand total of 55 years. But you can vote. Is that all? Said a voice behind the glass. Afshin Rattansi is the commentator extraordinary. He produces the best television show, and presents it, I should say, called Going Underground on RT UK. It is, I think, shown also worldwide. It is easily the best program of its kind on terrestrial television. If you don't catch it regularly, you really should. Afshan looked deeply into the Pandora's box, more deeply than I have been able to do. I had intended to do it this week. So, Afshan, my apologies for the less than forensic nature of my questions, because I'm not any better informed than I was last week about it. But the one thing that strikes you is that whilst valuable, the leaks expose some really rum characters, and already you see in the Czech Republic some knock-on effects of the disclosures. They were rather carefully targeted, the disclosures. There were lots of Russian names in there, but no Americans. And the only British one was Tony Blair and Cherie Blair, which is of interest to me in itself. Did you feel that it was clearly politically directed somehow, this leak?
Great show, George. Thanks for inviting me back on.
Welcome.
Yeah, and perhaps that's why I didn't pique your interest quite as much as it should. I think jiu-jitsu, although I don't play it, is important here, because the provenance of these leaks should not mean that we should ignore what's in them. But it's very important to know what the International Consortium for Investigative Journalists, widely distributed around the state-mandated BBC in this country, and of course in so-called mainstream media in the United States, what the significance is. The people that bankroll the ICIJ are linked to intelligence services. And as we both know, the greatest purveyor of leaked information for the ordinary man and woman on the street who wants to know about the military-industrial complex and what is done in their name is being tortured in prison down the road from where we're both talking to each other. And the bankroller of these leaks, or at least the ICIJ, is a man who stopped people being able to give money to WikiLeaks, to Julian Assange's WikiLeaks. He's Pierre Omidyar, who made a lot of money out of PayPal. We use that to buy and sell on the internet. Now, why is it a man associated with preventing Julian Assange's WikiLeaks organization from financing itself from £5, £10 donations should now want freedom of information? So that should immediately make us suspicious. But as you say, just because it is linked to these organizations, it's linked to certain journalists who have been very interested in de facto supporting wars in Syria and who knows what other wars NATO wants to get involved in. Yet we have names like Blair, we have names like NATO ally, the outgoing now Czech leader. Very interesting that just because these leaks come from this kind of source, we shouldn't ignore them. Although I have to say they haven't leaked the database, so we have to rely on the ICIJ for what information is in them. But as you say, the pictures that emblazoned newspapers all around the world were not of any American businessmen or businesswomen. They were of Vladimir Putin.
Well, actually, his picture was in the masthead above the headline of every single story, even though he actually isn't in it.
And what's interesting is, and I was on the BBC Question Time programme here, they do this debate programme, which is quite important, seen by, or was at least over a number of years when David Dimbleby was hosting it, sort of civic society programme for our international viewers and listeners. And I mentioned the Russian that was involved in funding Boris Johnson's party, and there was just silence, bemused silence. And of course, as you say, Vladimir Putin is pictured over all these leaks. In fact, the people that are named in these leaks, some of them are wanted in Russia because the authorities in Russia believe they've stolen money that we can see is the legacy of those great privatization years, which saw the life expectancy of Russians reduce when privatization created one of the most corrupt governments on earth, the Yeltsin government in Russia.
Exactly so. They hate Putin not for any bad thing that he does. They hate him because he's cracking down on these very oligarchs, most of whom are living in London and living a very high life in London, buying property, keeping property prices up in London, and because, of course, he opposes Western foreign policy in places like Syria. Why do you think, though, that they fingered, if you'll forgive the phrase, Tony Blair? Have they fallen out with him?
Oh, no. Poor Tony Blair. I mean, he must have been really upset about it. That is interesting. And why Sebastian Piñera in Chile? Why, some of these people don't necessarily make sense. I think one innocent explanation, because if people can watch my Going Underground show that we did the other day, where we actually got someone from the ICIJ, normally they don't want to speak because they're so associated with the NATO entities that are out there always saying they're doing good journalism. But when you look into it a bit more, you see, I don't know, the BBC had to apologize recently for a prize-winning investigation to a chemical attack in Syria. Later on, it turns out not the case. But if you look at our interview with the managing editor of the ICIJ, he seemed a pretty nice guy, actually, Fergus Shield. He was just a journalist, He said, I don't get Pierre Omidyar or any of these secret financiers, not so secret, but they don't tell us what to do. So sometimes good can come out of bad, perhaps. Is that the idea? No matter how much you can trace links to US aid and these so-called CIA cutouts, they are producing information, and we love information. I'm sure you're going to be, just as I at Going Underground, you at Moats and at your show Sputnik are going to go, leak us the database. We want to know about rich oligarchs who are stuffing money going to public libraries and the post office and the police service and the fire services.
That's entirely my point of view on it. Even if it was politically directed, even if it was funded by obscure, maybe even unpleasant sources, whatever its provenance, if it unmasked malfeasance or at least morally reprehensible behavior by rich and powerful people wherever they are, I'm for it. Now, on the subject of journalism and the greatest world historic journalist, Julian Assange, facing deportation to the United States later this month, the Nobel Peace Prize Committee has just recognized the importance of journalism in exposing bad things. How did you feel about that? I felt it was, again, a piece of hypocrisy. They haven't raised their voice for the release of Julian Assange, but let's give them a Nobel Prize for uncovering malpractice in places like Russia.
I mean, no one from the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize Committee, no one from the International Consortium for Investigative Journalists, maybe you, we don't have the right to shine the shoes of Julian Assange being tortured down the road here at Belmarsh Supermax prison. It was absolutely clear that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, and let's face it, we both know the Nobel Peace Prize is forever associated with Henry Kissinger and the mass murder of people in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, let alone Obama and his drone strikes that have killed so many people, and the wars, in effect, then, that displaced, wounded, or killed tens of millions of people in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and so forth. They gave it to a guy who's associated with Yabloko, which is a party in Russia associated with telling Putin, get out of Syria. In other words, associated with don't help President Assad fight ISIS, Daesh, and Al-Qaeda, groups that want to do us harm here in London, let alone do harm in, you're on FM radio in Washington, D.C.? Yeah. Do untold harm to Americans. So the Nobel Peace Prize was given to a journalist associated with a party that de facto wanted a victory for Al-Qaeda and ISIS, Daesh. So yet again, we have a Stockholm Nobel Prize Committee rewarding, what many around the world see as atrocities that we can't even speak to the pain that ISIS, Daesh, and Al-Qaeda and groups like that cause around.
Sattar dies all over again. Just finally, Afshin, I'm getting very nervous. You must be, as the date looms when Julian's fate will be decided. We talk, indeed I was talking earlier, about the heinous murder and mutilation of one journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, in the consulate in Turkey. But actually, the same liberals who are ready to denounce that remain silent on the fate that might await Julian Assange. Even a British judge said she could not recommend his extradition to the US because the likelihood of him staying alive there was so slim. What's your reading, given all that's happened since the American appeal went in, the discrediting of the central witness in the case against Julian, for example, now arrest of that central witness? Do you feel that the tide has turned in favor of a victory for Julian? And what would that look like? What would that mean if Julian were to be freed from prison in October 2021?
Well, he would only be freed, presumably on bail, because there's another court date in December in this tortuous, literally tortuous legal process. But of course, we now have mainstream media like Yahoo, although in Britain it wasn't at all reported. Maybe the Somali service of the BBC chose to report it, that there were gun battles and so on foreseen with British authorities to try and stop Julian Assange escaping the clutches of United States authorities. I hope that the lawyers for Julian Assange on October the 28th will be saying, forget the judgment that his life would be in danger if he was extradited for a possible 175-year sentence in a Virginia supermax prison. Forget that that's the reason he should not be allowed to go to the United States. He should not be allowed to go to the United States because from 30 unofficial sources, let alone what was previously shown by the Grey Zone, that outlet, we know now that apparently they were going to kidnap it and they were going to use helicopters to take down passenger planes at Heathrow Airport. I don't know which airport. They were going to have gun battles in Knightsbridge. I mean, the kind of illegality conceived of by the CIA with Mike Pompeo calling WikiLeaks a non-state hostile intelligence service, it's clear now that none of this case, let alone the spying on the lawyers and so on, makes this case credible at all. And as for the silence, Noam Chomsky famously always talks about us not having conspiratorial views about people in newsrooms or in newspapers, realizing a structural reason why people obey their editors, their senior managers, and so on, because of structural, the idea of the occupation of being a journalist. But I mean, George, it must have surprised even you that at least there were a few reports in the US, but in Britain, complete silence, even amongst partner organizations of WikiLeaks previously, like The Guardian. Very, very little, no headline news that they were getting British authorities to think of gun battles in the streets of London to kidnap Julian Assange or assassinate him.
Unbelievable. Afshin Rattansi, host of Going Underground on RT. Thanks for joining us on
Thank
the
you.
mother of all talk shows. I'll let you get back to Pandora's box. Now, in 1934, Mao Zedong and 25,000 troops began the 6,000-mile-long march. Why did they do it? A, retreating. B, attacking. C, exercising. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Well, Chairman Mao's Long March was, of course, a retreat, but it wasn't all that long before they were on the offensive again. We're taking your calls. If you're in the UK, 08081 965522, entirely free of charge. If you're in the US, it's toll-free, +1 844 944 3344. Now, we talked about Nobel Prizes earlier and the satire involved in the allocation of peace prizes, but no one makes any criticism about the other Nobel Prizes. And we're about to meet a man who won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry. No mean achievement, especially as he's from Motherwell, and there are not many Nobel Prize winners have come from the Steel City. Dr. David McMillan, Professor David McMillan, is now a professor at Princeton University and joins us from the United States now. Professor McMillan, it's a an honor to meet you. I have not yet ever met a Nobel laureate. Tell us how it goes. How do you hear that you're in the running? And if you're in the running, are you allowed to do a bit of wheeling and dealing and spinning and sharp elbows, Alec Ferguson type elbows? I mean, is there any of that, or is it an entirely decorous affair?
Thanks, George. Thanks for having me on this show. And I would say that I wish you could do wheeling and dealing, because I think coming from Scotland, maybe I've been a wee bit better at it. But no, it's completely anonymous. You don't know what's going on. You don't know who's nominated. You don't do a thing about it until allegedly you get the phone call. I didn't get the phone call because they were trying to reach me, but they couldn't reach me. And then someone else got to me, and I actually thought it was someone taking the mickey out of me. So I ended up just going back to sleep. And then I woke up a little bit later, went downstairs and looked at the front of the New York Times, and my face was there. So then I realized that this had actually happened. How
simply marvelous. There must have been dancing in the streets of Motherwell to this news. Now, how does it change your life? I mean, do you get better gigs? Do you get better wages? I mean, do you get access to research funding and so on that you wouldn't get? Presumably you do.
I don't know. I mean, it only happened 4 days ago. But it certainly changed my life in ways that are bizarre and crazy. I was on, yesterday morning, I was on my favorite radio show in the world, which is Off the Ball, the BBC Scotland football.
I've been on it many times. A wonderful show.
I love that show. Tam and Stuart are just the best. Yeah. But just the other thing, I mean, I was walking down the street, and I was in New York, and some people stopped me and sort of hugged me. I walked into a local restaurant, and the waitress came up and gave me a big hug. It's bizarre. It's just completely going from nowhere to sort of being known overnight. It's a pretty unique experience. And I think one that's obviously going to evolve over time. But at the moment, I'm still sort of getting used to the whole concept of it.
Well, you need an agent to get out and demand the bigger wages and so on. How did this all happen, David? There you are, a schoolboy in Scotland, in Motherwell, come from Motherwell. Where does the interest in science come from?
Well, for me, it was pretty interesting. I mean, my dad, as you mentioned, my dad was a steel worker. My mum was a home help. Basically, my brother, it was my older brother, decided he wanted to go to uni. And no one I knew had ever went to uni. And then he went. My mum and dad were actually pretty much against it. But he went, and so he was a real sort of first one over the trenches. And as soon as the day he graduated, he got a job where he was getting paid more money than my dad as a steelworker. And I think from that moment on, my mum and dad told me, "All right, you have to go to uni." So that was the deal. So if it wasn't for my brother, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now.
I never knew a Nobel laureate, but I never knew actually a chemist either. I mean, did you get ribbed at school as a geek?
No, I mean, I wasn't. I mean, it was one of those things. I think all my pals at school were surprised when I went to uni as well. So I wasn't really that massively into science or someone who was doing chemistry experiments in their bathtub at home. I wasn't that person. I mean, I always liked, thinking about, science and the logic of it and all of that when I was at school. I always thought that was really interesting. But I was never that person. And really, when you went to uni, well, the great thing about when you go to uni is all the people who are there are sort of into the same stuff you're into. So it worked out just fine. But no, I don't think anyone from the Bellshill Academy would remember me as somebody who was out there doing the mad scientist stuff.
Oh, you were at Bellshill? Oh, my goodness, that is remarkable. Now, look, treat us as idiots here. Try and explain to an audience of 1 million lay people, what was it about your work that first attracted the notice of the Nobel Prize Committee?
Well, what it was that, if you look around you right now, where you're sitting, everything around you is made by chemical reactions. Every single thing that you can see in front of you was made by a chemical reaction. And there's a thing called catalysis. And catalysis, or a catalyst, is a word that we more commonly use, is a way that you can not just accelerate how those reactions can be faster, you can invent completely new reactions, chemical reactions. as a result of which you can use them for making new medicines, new materials, lots of things you can use it for. And what we did, so catalysts have been known for a very long time, but the vast majority of them are metals. You know, the thing in your car is a metal. And metals are sort of bad for the environment often, they're toxic often. So what we decided to do was to say, is it possible you could actually use organic molecules? And if you're wondering what an organic molecule is, if you look at your hands right now, you are organic, you're made of organic molecules. So you know that those are not really toxic because we walk around, we live in this environment. It's completely fine. We're actually pretty, I wouldn't say that human race is benign to the environment, but humans on their own are benign. And so those organic molecules in and of themselves, we thought, would it be possible we could come up with a field of catalysis that would use those instead of using metals? And it was one of those sort of wacky ideas that should have never worked, but it did work. And so then that's how the whole thing got going.
Unbelievable. And you did this in conjunction with a German scientist, is that right?
Not quite. I mean, we both did it completely independently from each other. And so basically what happened is we both submitted our studies for publication basically about exactly the same time, remarkably, actually. And so it was just and I think that in and of itself helped the field take off as well, because it's kind of noticeable that two different people kind of had the same idea at the same moment.
What applications would there be for your discovery?
Well, the first ones that, a lot of chemists care about, as you might expect, is pharmaceuticals. And so it's used extensively for pharmaceutical, both discovery, but then you've got one of the trickiest things about pharmaceuticals, you have to make enough of it to give to society. There's a lot of people, that's a lot of medicine you need. So it's used in that context. The other way is in a lot, also nowadays, is materials. There's so many materials that are found worldwide now that you can make them using this type of catalysis as well.
What's the dough? I mean, you get a hat and a scroll and all that, but is there money in it?
There is. I was told this yesterday, and I don't know, I haven't actually sat down and even thought about it. Everyone's been so kind of wild. I think I was told in kroner, which I didn't understand, but then Tam and Stuart told me yesterday it was £800,000, which I think is about the right. I think that's the ballpark. I haven't been told exactly what it is, so I really don't know but I know it's a decent sized number.
You'll need to throw a party, if not in Princeton, then in Motherwell.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think, we haven't decided what we're going to do, but a lot of it will be reinvesting back into like Bellsall Academy and New Stevenston Primary and St. Pat's and New Stevenston as well. So those are probably the first place we'll start in thinking about what we're going to do with it.
What team do you support, David?
I'm a big Rangers fan, George.
Somebody told me that earlier. They said you were a teddy bear.
A teddy bear, yeah, yeah.
You have to be from where we're from to know what that means. Well, I take my hat off for the first time to a Rangers fan, Professor David McMillan, Nobel laureate from Motherwell. Who'd have thunk it? Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. How extraordinary is that? Now, Moats, the podcast, continues to go from strength to strength, it says here. Once again, you've broken our listener record, an increase of 18%. Now listen to this. We are the second highest listened to podcast in Singapore. We're big in Singapore. We're in the top 10 in Zimbabwe and in Egypt. And we're now a permanent fixture in the UAE charts. That's at least until tonight's broadcast is listened to by the relevant authorities. Thanks very much for listening to the podcast. It's the distilled version of this 3-hour show. You can subscribe to the Moats on the Go and leave us a 5-star review, will you, on Apple Podcasts. It helps us a great deal to grow. Now, Tom Orr says, thanks to Moats, I realise how little I know, which makes me want to know more. There are lots of independent media outlets here and America. I hope people will come to the same realization that I have and want to know more. That's what we are about, Tom. Thanks very much indeed for that. Tremendous amount of social media. But I better take a call, I think, not least because the caller's name is Fidel. Go ahead, Fidel.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway.
Good evening to you.
It's an absolute pleasure and honour to be on your show.
Thank you, sir. Wonderful name you've got, I must say.
No, what it is, I'm not a sir. There's too many of them in the world. I think we both know that.
Yeah.
And my name is a persona at the moment, if you don't mind, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm calling you sir now. Thank you, George. I'm just two things. First of all, Marcus Rashford. I'll leave Marcus, bless him, till last. The first thing, BBC, Pandora Papers, they're at it again. President Putin's on their page. Now,
first, he's the first face on the rank. And he's not in the Pandora box.
No, it's nothing to do with it at all. No.
It's just there's some Russians that are in it. So let's put the president of Russia's picture on the story.
Yeah, that's ridiculous, isn't it?
Even though most of the Russians that are in the box are actually exiled out of Russia, and many of them are wanted criminals.
Well, they are criminals. What they've done to their own mother Russia, they are criminals.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And what makes me laugh is, George, it really, I have to laugh because if you take it literally, itself, you'd cry. So, I have to laugh,
Well, look at that. Just look at this, Fidel. Look at the point that Afshin just made.
Yeah. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Afshin Rattansi is another one of my heroes.
Oh, he's fantastic.
In the same standard as you, sir, and Max Kaiser.
Yeah. No, we've got a great stable at RT. Yes. They can try and rubbish us, but what they can't do is deny the quality of these shows that you mentioned. No, I mean, the point he made, Yahoo did thousands of words. Yahoo now, not the Workers' Daily. Yeah. Yahoo done thousands of words in which they described in detail with 30 sources from the White House, from the Pentagon, from the intelligence community, describing how a murderous criminal rampage was being discussed about how to kidnap and maybe kill somebody in London in an embassy. And not one of these outfits, not the BBC, not ITV, not Channel 4, none of them even reported it.
No mainstream media.
It's unbelievable.
Of the oligarchs, the corporations, the corporations, the military-industrial complex, running the world. They're in their pockets. There's no true journalism no more. That's why we need people like you.
Well, we're doing our best. Thank you, Fidel, as you will forever be known to me. Marek says, no, these are local or national teams. If a club does well because of an injection of cash from another country, the whole thing becomes meaningless. It's not your town or city that has won a competition. It's a foreign-owned business. That's not the beautiful game. Well said, Marek. And John Miles says, there is a fit and proper stipulation on all takeovers of football clubs in England, but as always, money can make anyone fit and proper. And Block says, get it back to the fans. But good Lord, that seems a million miles away right now. Dan says, I voted no, even though we all are perfectly aware that everything is for sale in today's economic system, from basic services like gas, electric and water to public transport, NHS and politicians. And Len says, why not? They've already bought the rest of the country. And Tommy Ryan says, Newcastle United fans will not give a toss if it brings them success. Happiness is a drug without bounds. And David Martin says, remove the US military base from Riyadh and the Saudi royal family falls. And Timothy says, how much does a Nobel Prize cost? Well, weren't you, as I was, incredibly impressed by how refreshingly honest and down-to-earth Professor McMillan was? He's now a Nobel Prize winner. Can you believe that? from Bell's Hill. From Bell's Hill to the heights of a Nobel Prize. Rob Sutton says, I think we've already hit peak Starmer in the polls. I think he's won over all the Tories he ever will. What he doesn't realise is that unlike Blair in 97, socialists have completely abandoned him and are not coming back. He's still fishing for elusive Tories, while the heart and soul of Labour are searching for new homes. Let Starmer go and split the Tory vote. We need to unite the left and steamroller both of them. That was from Rob. And Daniel says, I found last week's discussion regarding Mountbatten and the suppression of information fascinating. It made me think of another interesting episode, which I'll keep brief. Martin Allen wrote 2 books, Hidden Agenda, How the Duke of Windsor Betrayed the Allies and Himmler's Secret War, where it is alleged that he made use of, or may have been the author of, fake documents secretly smuggled into the National Archives, which detailed secret knowledge of the Hess flight. And more importantly, there were documents that detailed the nature of the Duke's ties with the Nazi Party and his alleged treachery. They were judged by an expert to be fake, but the fake was of an exceptionally high standard. The forger of documents of this quality would have had to have been an expert on the subject and in forgery, including signatures. In addition, 1940s paper and a 1940s era typewriter were used to write these documents. This seems to me to be a disproportionate effort if faked for the benefit of any publication. If they were forged by another actor, what was the purpose? Were these documents indeed fake, or were they real? Was the author simply discredited so that the documents could be ignored, so the powers that be could cover up some inconvenient truths? That's from Dan in Brighton. That's fascinating. Can we get further and better on this story? Maybe get a guest on the show about it? I'm asking my editor through the glass. Now, with a Nobel Prize winner on the show this week, cast your mind back to 2016. Who won the Nobel Prize for Literature that year? A. Philip Roth, B. J.K. Rowling, C. Bob Dylan. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
You know, I had that George Galloway back in here the other day. Well, I'll tell you what, talk about the knowledge. By the time he got out, I had a first-class degree.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
It's for you, sir.
Where's the cheese pizza, Robinson? Come on, what are the public paying you for? Oh, and get another virgin colada while you're there. There's a good chap. No, who's ringing the old burner phone? Hello? How did you get this number, Ghislaine? No, that's impossible. I can't possibly fly to New York. Why? Our mummy's grounded me. Oh, yes. Starting to cut off my allowance, you know. Yes, I know it comes from the public, but she holds the strings. Oh, I've got to go. My pizza will be here any minute. I'm not sweating, you're sweating. Ghislaine, don't call again. Robinson? Sir. Come here with that moist towelette. It's getting a bit hot for my liking.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
It was, of course, the one and only Bob Dylan that won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2016. Should countries, foreign entities, be allowed to buy football clubs? Yes, still a quarter of you nearly, 24%. No, 2/3 of you, 66%. And C, depends which country, 10%. So you've got a few minutes left to get your votes in on that. But let me take some calls. Kenneth is in my hometown of Dundee on one of my favourite subjects, Scottish nationalism. Kenneth, go ahead.
Yeah, I was listening to your discussion with John Curtice, he's always an excellent guest. He's very, very knowledgeable.
Yeah.
And it was the issue that he raised about the fact that Brexit meant that there would be at least slight tip towards the independence vote. I know that you took issue with that.
Yeah, he made the point that there were swings and roundabouts. There were some people switched one way because of it, but more, he said, switched the other way because of it. But although this might be the point you're about to make, Kenneth, if the Nationalists had won in 2014, Scotland would already have been many years outside the EU.
Yeah, well, I was strongly against, I don't like the word independence. Nationalism, which I think should be something that should be avoided unless it's essential, unless you're being oppressed or unless perhaps you speak a different language or there's an obvious geographical division. But in Scotland and England, it makes absolute sense for us to stick together. I remember I'm born in 1965. I remember at school being taught about Battle of Bannockburn and all that sort of stuff, and you quite enjoyed the, stick it up the English, send them homewards to think again, sort of Flower of Scotland mentality. But somewhere in the back of even my childlike mind, I was thinking, isn't it great that that's all in the past? Isn't it great that we're all just one country in this tiny little island, as Vladimir Putin once perhaps slightly disparagingly referred to it? It just makes absolute sense to join together. But the point I'm making is I'm kind of backing up John Curtice in that for once in my life, I am sorely tempted to vote, or I might be, to vote for independence. I don't think I would, but because of the fact of Brexit, I'm someone who is a unionist and also thinks it makes sense to be in the European Union, albeit that I've got a lot of disagreements. The very fact that the very fact that we've got a potential democratic institution, the European Union, which could act as a self-defence mechanism, as I see it, against the power of global multinationals who love small countries.
How's that been going?
I know it. I agree. Well, at the moment...
If my auntie had balls, she'd be my uncle, David, Kenneth.
Well, the thing is, it is a democratic institution.
How is it democratic? In what way is it democratic?
We each get one vote. Our vote at the moment is cast. Well, sorry,
we don't get one vote. What are you talking about? Nobody elects the people that run the European Union. The European Parliament, if it's that you're referring to, is a useless, toothless, rubber stamp assembly. It has no power at all.
No, I mean the member states. Ultimately, the member states can decide how the institutions change, and we did have our vote through David Cameron.
One country out of 28.
True.
What's democratic about that?
That could be said about any polity. That could be said about, for instance, London might say...
Malta having the same vote as us is democratic.
Well, I agree with you about the way, but that in a way you might say that that's almost... countries like Germany and Britain are almost giving up their power.
We did give up our power. We gave up our power and we gave up a lot of our money. We were net contributors to the European Union from day one until the last day, whilst most of the countries in the European Union are net beneficiaries of it.
To me, that was incredibly enlightened. As a socialist, I like to see us help other countries get up to the standards of the living standards.
Have you seen how some of these countries are run and the purposes for which they're run and who runs them? You're talking as if you were like St. Vincent de Paul distributing alms to the poor masses of Europe. You were giving money to rotten European governments.
Yeah, some of them I would disagree with, but remember, they are democratically elected as well. And the European Union, is wrong to say that the European Union couldn't have the member states. You're saying that, well, okay, Moldova gets the same vote as Germany, true. But the point is, we each, just like constituencies within the UK Parliament, you could say the same about Dundee constituency. Oh, we can't change the government. Of course we can't, as the people in Dundee West, as I live in. But as soon as the point is, the difficulty is when you live together in large groups in society, you can't always get your own way.
No.
And the European institutions were a good idea. Thatcher realised that. That's why she turned against it. As soon as they started to do things
well,
like
how has it been for us?
Rights,
Kenneth, we were in it until very recently for more than 40 years. How did it work out?
Yeah.
Did we do well under it, or did we not?
I don't think we did badly.
How can you say that, Kenneth? When we went in, I'm older than you. When we went in, we had everything. We had a coal industry, a steel industry, a shipbuilding industry. We were the railway workshop of the world. We had a motor car industry, a truck industry, a motorbike industry. We were an industrial powerhouse when we went in. How were we when we came out?
It was, well, these are, I think, more due to the neoliberal policies that Mrs. Thatcher, and remember Dennis Healey at the time saying.
So membership of the membership of the European Union did not protect us at all.
No, true, because most of the countries in the European Union adopted or are fairly right-wing countries, and that's just something. I mean, I've hated it all my life. The fact that we've had conservative governments, and that's one of the reasons. If you listen to Nicola Sturgeon, she's making the same argument you're making about the European Union. We're dictated to by the United Kingdom.
Except in this case, we are, and we lost from it. We lost wages, conditions, standards through the so-called free movement of actual drafting of cheap East European labour, which came here in their millions and bust the labour market. Surely you can see that.
Well, I think that's more to do with the destruction of the trade unions.
Well, you keep saying you've always got a if only my auntie had balls argument.
True,
the point is, Kenneth, that's what happened. Of course, it could have been something. No, but you said it was because of neoliberals, because of the lack of trade unions. But these are two realities.
True, but exactly the same argument that you're making against the EU. And I used to be convinced. Was a massive fan of Tony Benn. But the only thing with hindsight...
Where did you lose the faith then? Where did you lose the faith in that?
I didn't lose the faith. I just changed my mind on the European Union because I see it as a potential... I mean, it's not there at the moment. I totally agree with you. A potential bulwark, and that's why the right wing hate it. That's why Donald Trump hates it, because he realises...
When you say the right wing hate it, the right wing run it.
Well,
did you see the referendum led by David Cameron, George Osborne, the CBI, the John Major, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown? The right wing love it.
And I know you've got a good point there, but I think it's got the potential. I agree with Yanis Varoufakis on this. It's not.
My auntie could potentially be my uncle if only she grew a pair of balls. Kenneth, this is balls that you are talking. But let me take you back to your original point. First of all, if Scotland ever got the chance again to vote, and that's a moot point, if they voted to break up this small island of ours, what guarantee have you got that independent Scotland would be allowed into the EU? And perhaps more importantly, how could that independent Scotland, without a currency, without a bank, conceivably comply with the convergence terms required of all new members to have a deficit of 3% or less, when our deficit is almost 5 times that.
That's why I don't think it makes sense to leave the UK with reluctance. I probably would stay in the UK, but the point I'm making is exactly the same argument that you're making against staying in the EU is made by the Scottish nationalists.
Why am I making it then? Why was Mr. Ben making it? Why was Bob Crow making it? Why was Arthur Scargill making it? Why was Michael McGahey making it? Why was the Morning Star making it? Why was the British Communist Party making it? Why were we all doing that? Are we idiots, Kenneth?
No, I think it's because you saw that the rules of the European Union, especially things like supporting your own industry, and I disagree with those, did favour...
Oh, this is another thing. If only they didn't have these rules precluding public... it's in the constitution of the organisation. A constitution that cannot be changed. Anyway,
no, it can. The EU constitution was changed many times.
It cannot be changed except by the agreement of the very people who put it there in the first place. It cannot be changed except by a unanimous decision of, in this case, 28 countries would have to simultaneously want to abolish neoliberal capitalism, all of them, at once. I keep telling you, Kenneth, if my auntie had a pair of balls like that, she sure would be my uncle. It's been wonderful disagreeing with you, but I need to hear from Dave in Ceredigion. Forgive me, Dave.
Ceredigion.
Thank you. Easy for you to say.
Well, no, I'm an import myself, so it's not necessarily all that easy.
Okay.
Could I just say about the last conversation that I do marvel that these Remainers keep coming out of the jungle like lost Japanese
soldiers on the islands.
World War, still making the same arguments.
Exactly.
But even on top of that, when they tell you that if you live in a large group of people, you don't always get your own way.
It is marvellous. And he sounded like a young man as well. He's the youngest of these Japanese soldiers.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
He should start by listening to himself harder.
Good. Go on, Dave.
Before I actually make the point, I just want to say I've become a regular watcher on YouTube over the last couple of months.
Thank you.
Probably something to do with the fact that I've got more time now that my Labour Party membership has lapsed.
Aha. Excellent. Good decision. You left before they kicked you out.
I've been trying to get them to kick me out, but I'm not important enough to notice. I guess not strategic in some way.
Yeah. Make your point quickly then, Dave.
Yes, all right. About the football, you probably know this. There's a set of rules that is supposed to stop people spending too much on football clubs. I think they're called financial fair play or something like that.
Ha ha. Yes.
Probably stands for don't make it too bleeding obvious, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
So I was wondering whether you would like to get someone on who would explain to, because I'm not an expert, who would explain to you how the financial fair play regulations were going to be applied to Newcastle in the future and whether they would in fact survive. You could maybe do a poll.
I'll tell you what, we will do that, Dave, because, look, I wish Newcastle United nothing but happiness. I love the people of Newcastle. I even like the team. I even like the team they've got now, never mind the team that they are going to have. It's not their fault. They were led by a guy who let them down so badly and for so many years. But the reality is the Saudis have now got their hands on the club and everything is about to change, no doubt. I promise you, Dave, we'll return to this subject. Well, look, coming up after the news, it's Garland Nixon. But next, it's the news with Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
Britain's business secretary has said he is convinced the UK will not suffer gas shortages in the coming months and insisted that a price cap on consumers' energy bills will not be moved this winter. Kwasi Kwarteng said he was convinced that we will have full energy supply, he said, despite soaring wholesale gas prices around the world. Although he stopped short of offering a full guarantee that there would not be disruption. He went on to claim that he was in talks with Chancellor Rishi Sunak's team on possible further support for businesses facing higher bills. But a Treasury source said later that they are not involved in any talks and added that it wasn't the first time that Kwarteng had, quote, made things up in interviews. The UK is facing an uncertain winter with the spread of the coronavirus and the flu, the head of the Health Security Agency, Jenny Harries, has said. She said that people are at more significant risk of death and of serious illness if they are co-infected with both viruses. More than 40 million people in the UK are being offered a flu jab this year. For the first time, this includes all secondary school children up to the age of 16. The over 50s and younger adults with health conditions are also being offered a COVID booster jab this autumn and winter. UK demands over the Northern Ireland Protocol could cause a breakdown in relations with the EU, Ireland's foreign minister has warned. Simon Coveney made the comments after the UK reiterated that it just wants the European Court of Justice removed from oversight of the deal. Coveney said in his Twitter posting that this was the creation of a new red line which the EU cannot move on. The EU will bring forward proposals on Wednesday for reforming the protocol, which will focus on easing practical problems with the movement of goods from Britain to Northern Ireland rather than changing oversight arrangements. Lord Frost later responded to Mr Coveney on social media saying that he would prefer, quote, not to do negotiations on Twitter, but that the issue of governance and the ECJ is not new. People have to get used to higher food prices, the boss of Kraft Heinz has said. Miguel Patricio said the international food giant, which makes tomato sauce and baked beans, was putting up its prices in several countries. Unlike previous years, he said inflation was across the board. The rising cost of ingredients such as cereals and oil has pushed global food prices to a 10-year high, according to the UN and World Food Organization. Kraft Heinz has increased prices on more than half of its products in the US, its home market, and Patricio admitted that it's happening elsewhere too. Taiwan will not bow to pressure from China and will defend its democratic way of life, President Tsai Ing-wen has said in a defiant speech amid heightened tensions over the island. She said, quote, the more we achieve, the greater the pressure we face from China. Her speech on Taiwan's National Day came after China's President Xi Jinping vowed to fulfill reunification. Taiwan considers itself a sovereign state, while China views it as a breakaway province. Beijing has also not ruled out the possible use of force to achieve unification. Tsai was re-elected by a landslide last year on a promise to stand up to Beijing. In her speech today, she said Taiwan was, quote, standing on democracy's first line of defence. She said the island would not act rashly, but would bolster its defences to ensure, she said, that nobody can force Taiwan to take the path China has laid out for us. That path she described as neither a free and democratic way of life for Taiwan nor sovereignty for its 23 million people. She also repeated an offer to talk with Chinese leaders on an equal footing, a suggestion Beijing, which brands her as a separatist, has so far rejected. Police in Guatemala have rescued 126 migrants who were abandoned inside a shipping container at the side of a road. They were found at dawn between the towns of Nueva Concepcion and Gonzales after locals reported hearing screams inside the trailer. Authorities believe they were abandoned by smugglers who had been paid to take them to the US via Mexico. More than 100 of those discovered are from the crisis-hit nation of Haiti. 40 small boats with 1,115 migrants on board have crossed the Channel in 2 days, the UK's Home Office has said. On Saturday, Border Force picked up 491 migrants on 17 boats, while the French authorities prevented 114 people from making the crossing. On Friday, 624 people crossed on 23 boats, with 300 more being stopped by French authorities. In September, 3,879 made the crossing. More migrants crossed than any other in previous months since the crisis began. More than 18,000 people have made the crossing from France to England in small boats so far this year, compared to just over 8,460 in 2020, according to Home Office figures. And finally, messing around with porridge is likely to induce apoplexy in a Scotsman woman, and the rest of us don't stray far from adding raisins and berries to flavour it. But now a savoury dish containing mushrooms and white wine has won this year's World Porridge Making Championship and been awarded the Golden Spurtle. A spurtle, for those who don't know, is an ancient wooden tool used to stir the porridge. Other ingredients in the oat arancini made by 25-year-old Dutch food blogger Miriam Groot included vegetable stock, lemon zest and pepper. Arancini are stuffed Italian rice balls that are coated in breadcrumbs and deep fried. In hers, Groot used pinhead oatmeal instead of rice. The competition is usually held in the Scottish Highland village of Carbridge, but those taking part in the virtual, usually Golden Spurtle, of 2021 were asked to submit footage of themselves making a favourite oat dish online. Groot's online blog, for anyone interested in her recipes, is called The Veggie Reporter. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Are we heading to war with China, yes or no? It may very well turn out that that's not a question that we ourselves will answer. The Chinese might answer it for us. In the Global Times this very day, it was suggested that now that it is revealed and admitted that the United States has stationed its war personnel on the island of Taiwan, that the Chinese may have to preemptively attack and destroy American military assets on Chinese soil, because Taiwan is Chinese soil. And it's not just China that thinks that. Taiwan also thinks that. The United Nations also thinks that. International law also thinks that. So ponder this. Imagine if the people of the United States woke up to discover that in support of secessionist forces, say in California, the Chinese military had moved in overnight and were now supplying and setting up weapons systems and training the Californian secessionists. You've only got to put it that way to even begin to realize exactly what the response in the United States would be. But somehow, through American exceptionalism, that is seen differently. So China might attack the illegal American military assets in Taiwan. In any case, the United States gunboats are in the South China Sea, the clue being in the name, with two pedalos alongside, belonging to Britain and to Australia. The Chinese Navy might sink them. The point being that we should not imagine that we can continue to up the ante more and more and more and more against China without China responding. If I was running China, call me hot-headed, I'd already have responded. Let's cross the Atlantic and talk to the finest independent political commentator of them all, Garland Nixon, who joins us again on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Always a pleasure to see you. Let's start with what's happening in China, Garland. I was on RT America in the week when this story broke. Farhan, our colleague, said that she'd known this for about a year. I had not known it. It came as a great shock to me. It struck me as a kind of Cuban Missile Crisis moment. And from what I can see of Chinese responses, they're treating it that way. It's a serious juncture, isn't it?
It is. I tell you something interesting also about this, and that is how the revelation came about at a time when Joe Biden is his confused China policy towards China seemed to be trying to pull back a little bit when Jake Sullivan was meeting with the Chinese representative, and it seemed as though that the Biden administration wanted to kind of calm things down a bit. This came out in the Wall Street Journal from anonymous officials, and there are many security experts here who believe that this represents the divide in the neocon establishment, and that there were those who saw Joe Biden's moves as capitulation and basically did this to throw a monkey wrench in it. I would suspect the Chinese, in the same way, Vladimir Putin always says, nothing moved, has basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, that nothing happens in Ukraine without him knowing it. I would imagine that nothing happens in Taiwan without the Chinese leadership knowing it. I would suspect that they already knew those troops were there. I would be shocked if they didn't. But the revelation coming out in the Wall Street Journal, it is suspected, reveals moves that are happening within the neocon establishment.
As you know, Garland, face and saving it, keeping it, is it's something for everybody, but for Chinese people in particular, it is a very pronounced characteristic of theirs. They might have known or believed, suspected that these American forces were on Taiwan, but for the world to be told it by the Wall Street Journal represents a gigantic loss of face for China. And it may be that is what has made this now a very acute matter indeed.
Yes, and it also represents something, and that is the U.S. is extremely reckless towards China, and our leadership, and I use that word guardedly, does not recognize the importance of red lines. And when it comes to China, I suspect they're going to continue crossing red lines. I think, they're not being responsible for another reason, and that is, most security experts, when they evaluate and war game what would happen if the U.S. attempted to were to, be engaged in kinetic warfare with China, the odds are overwhelming that the U.S. would lose. And the fear is that the U.S. would lose, that would retaliate with some form of a nuclear confrontation, and that would certainly devolve into the end of all of us. So it's showing that our leaders do not understand how to operate in a multipolar world. They're talking to China as though they're talking to Guatemala or some very small landlocked country that they can easily dominate, and that's not the case.
Quite so. Now, President Xi said this week that it was a matter of national honor for China to reunify its whole territory. As I said earlier, there is no question that Taiwan is a part of its territory. This is accepted in Taiwan as well as in China, and indeed in all legal fora in the world. Taiwan is not a separate country. And this kind of recklessness could lead to China taking back Taiwan by force. Now, I saw a very dismaying opinion poll today online, admittedly from CNN, so not the most auspicious of sources, but it showed that a majority of Americans would be ready to go to war to defend what they called the independence of Taiwan.
A couple of things involved, and that is, again, it's a CNN poll. I don't know how much I trust it. But the other part of it is this, that the mainstream media has been so taken over by the intelligence community, by the Pentagon, that it doesn't surprise me because people only hear one side of the story, and that's the neocon argument. Additionally, Americans, in hearing that, have no clue the actual, the possible outcome of this. Americans have been watching, smart bombs dropping in Iraq in 1991, or they've been watching the U.S. military go up against smaller countries, and they don't really understand the level of warfare they're talking about. Not to mention the fact that a war, going to war with your number one trade partner would end our economy in a way that would make the 1929 crash look like, the heyday of American economics.
A very good point, Garland. If China decided tonight, and heaven knows why they don't, that they would no longer accept dollars in payment for goods and services they're selling overseas, that they would prefer it in euros, thank you very much, or prefer it in some other currency. This itself would be totally devastating to the American financial system and the stranglehold that the US has over that financial system, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, and you bring up a good point, because the U.S. is thinking only of, its ability to have military dominance, which even now it doesn't have military dominance in that area. But additionally, China has a lot of cards that it could play. China holds $1.5 trillion in the U.S. debt, and as you said, as you mentioned or alluded to, it is the world's industrial engine. They could make moves if China determines, and think about this, it wouldn't be a bad move for China. When they look at the alternatives. If the alternative is kinetic warfare with the United States, they may determine that they're willing to take an economic hit rather than a military hit to take the United States out, and then they could make economic moves. They could stop shipping things to us. They could close down some of our major technical firms that are, all of our major technology firms who are kind of based out of there as far as their hardware. So if China determines that kinetic warfare is in order, they may just decide to use all other means to devastate the U.S. economy and just decide they'll take a hit along with us to wake the United States up.
Now, Garland, you talked about your leadership. We'll not dwell on Joe Biden. It's a sorry sight. But I watched Kamala Harris in the week talking to some school kids. And I've got to tell you, I wondered what she was on. She seemed high to me, spaced out. She was talking about space. Maybe she was just getting carried away. But I got to thinking that woman's finger might be on the trigger very soon.
Well, it may be on the trigger for a bit, but I can't see her having a lot of luck in 2024. So far, Joe Biden seems to be holding out. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. But one thing is obvious in watching that, as a person who's done a lot of television, not saying that I'm good or bad at it, but I've done a lot. Kamala Harris is extremely uncomfortable in front of the camera. She has very, very poor political skills and very poor skills in front of the camera. She looked like a deer in the headlights. She started meandering and wandering around with her discussion, and it turned into a rather embarrassing word salad. So I cannot see Kamala Harris as a viable presidential candidate, as sad as she looks when she's in front of a camera, and just totally lost. It was just an embarrassing ramble. I had to cover my eyes and put my head down to watch her.
Yes, well, I watched it twice for that reason, because I couldn't quite believe that it was real. I love that phrase, word salad. That's exactly what it was. And boy, what a salad. Now, speaking of 2024, is it true that Donald Trump has now raised more than $100 million and he hasn't even declared yet?
Yes, Donald Trump will raise plenty of money, but that's the least of their problems with Donald Trump. If you remember, he won in 2016 and Hillary Clinton outspent him 2-1. So Donald Trump had a rally in Iowa, which is a state that used to be reliably blue, but he won it in both 2016, I think by 9 points in 2016 and 8 points in 2020. He has his highest approval rating ever in Iowa at 53%. So he went right to the state where he's getting a lot of love. The thing I'm keeping an eye on, this is what I'm keeping an eye on when it comes to Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis and his relationship with Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is very, very popular in the Republican electorate. He's popular in Florida, and that's a very important state. So he could provide those electoral votes out of Florida for Donald Trump. They seem to have an amicable relationship, and I can see a Trump-DeSantis ticket in 2024 against Harris and whoever, Pete Buttigieg is who they'd likely throw in with her, I would think, or of course Biden, Kamala, and I see Trump and DeSantis winning that, save for, and let's not forget this, save for the Biden team has the national security state and the media, but I repeat myself, on his side, and they will do everything they can to ensure that democracy does not reign, regardless of how the people vote.
Well, they tried that, of course, in 2016, and it didn't work. And they spent 4 years trying to destroy Trump's presidency, and he got more votes in 2020 than he got in 2016. So it's not that they can fix everything, Garland.
Yeah, no, it's not, but they'll certainly do everything they can. And, when you look at what's happening in China and when you read, the New York Times, the Washington Post, it is clear that the national security state sees Donald Trump and the MAGA movement as a hindrance, to say the least, against the empire's policies, the empire's move to realign to an Anglo-Saxon English-speaking only empire with the UK and the British and the US. So I think the national security state goes code red when they have any thoughts of Donald Trump winning in 2024. And they also probably understand that Donald Trump recognizes that he made some mistakes in not moving to pull out of various countries and pull out of various conflicts early enough, and that if he were to get back in, he'd be on the move doing that very soon. And I'm no Trump fan, but that's just my evaluation.
Garland Nixon, it's always worth hearing your evaluation. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Much obliged to you, sir. Now, I've got another question. No, I've got more calls, actually. Can I take these calls? Terence is in Norwich on Saudi and football. Terence, go ahead. Terence, are you there?
Can you hear me, Mr. Galloway?
I can now, yes. Go ahead, sir.
First of all, give my regards to your auntie or uncle, whichever one turns up first. I think that Mr. Altikriti hit the nail on the head earlier, but he didn't dwell in it long enough. The idea of morality, and until we get Sheikh, Mr. blood dripping hands from Saudi Arabia and his ilk around the world, the UAE, and that, until we actually take as humans our humanity and keep exposing the immorality, nothing's going to change. As St. Augustine said, you can try to bury it, and I paraphrase, you can try to bury it, burn it, but the truth will always be there. We are dealing with hideous people. And until we stand up and show our morality, apparently Britain was the moral bedrock of the world at one time. Now it's the moral degenerate, dare I say, of the world, in my opinion.
Well, I'm not sure we ever were the moral bedrock. Neither do I think we are in any way exclusively morally degenerate. I think the system that spans most of the globe is a degenerate system. It does profane all that is sacred. It does melt all that is solid. And we have to confront that central fact. But meanwhile, it is true, Terence, that football clubs are chattels, they are goods, they are on a shelf that can be purchased.
Money laundering.
Yeah, they can be purchased by the highest bidder. You and I can't buy, not that I'd want to, the latest Ferrari, but it's there for sale, whoever wants to buy it. Now, I argue football should be a special case. I think it's as central to our life as any of our other institutions and should not be a mere plaything in the marketplace. What do you say?
I don't accept the central thing in our place. It's got a special place, sport, but I think we overhype it on times. We have to keep the moral view and the moral compass here. And the moral compass, quite simply, is until we make a stand. I have nothing against Newcastle fans, and I'm a Manchester United fan all my life, and I'm nothing against any football club doing well, and good luck to them. The areas are run down and they need regeneration, but we do not need the greed from the go. And the go is coming from the murderers, the regimes. We have money launderers in that league. They buy it to launder money. They buy it to keep the properties in London, as you said earlier yourself, at such a ridiculously high price. People in London got to move out. And these are all platitudes that we use about football. It is just a game, Mr. Galloway. We need to look at, as Mr. Altikriti, obviously the Iraqi, his forebears are from Iraq, he just brushed over it. He raised that one word, morality, and we've lost morality, Mr. Galloway, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, we have across the society as a whole. Terence, that's a fascinating call. Let me hear from Wayne in Cheshire. Go ahead, Wayne.
It's always a pleasure, George.
And you?
I was doing some, it's a bit weird day really, I was doing some research this afternoon I got to thinking about Newcastle with the Saudi Arabia situation. And I thought, what, are they just doing it for money, or are they getting something out of this?
I think they're not doing it for money, Wayne. I think they're doing it to wash their dirty, blood-stained hands. Just like the UAE, just like Qatar to a lesser extent. They're not quite so bloody. They are doing, they've got all the money that you could possibly dream of. So what to do with it? You can only consume so many Ferraris. You can only gamble so many times in a casino or whatever else they do with their money. Let's, they say, buy something that will make us look better, less ugly.
Yeah. So what happened was, my research this afternoon, obviously there's a connection between arms, British arms companies, they buy a lot from us and we do deals with them. Anyway, so a couple of hours researching and I got to BAE Systems. And I also got to an article that Saudi Arabia are putting in money and also said that they will buy them the new Tempest fighter jet. I thought, oh, that's interesting. They're also partly financing it as well. And then I looked, I couldn't believe it, where it was being designed. It was being designed and built in Newcastle.
Really? I didn't know that.
Well, I didn't know myself until I looked this afternoon. On the address of the website, it was bizarre. It said Washington.
Washington, County Durham.
Ah, yeah, well, that sort of area.
Washington, CD rather than DC.
Yeah. Yeah, but it didn't say nothing to do on the address. It was Newcastle. I thought, this is strange. So I had to go on the map. I thought, where was it next to? I thought, And now I'm not putting two and two together and making six here. But it does seem, now, if they buy Newcastle, they put some money into it, the local people are going to love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think they will. They've already got the local people on their side, partly because the previous regime was so bad. But once they start spending, buying players, managers, they'll start to climb up the league. Eventually, they'll probably win it. And that will ensure legendary status on Tyneside. But the real big enchilada for them is not just to whitewash, sports wash their dirty hands. It's to compete with the other Gulf potentates. You might think, why do they care? The truth is the jealousy and hatred even between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and intermittently between the UAE and the other two. Saudi Arabia, for example, thinks there should be nothing called the UAE. It should belong to Saudi Arabia. The British stole it and gave it independence to stop them reunifying the territory and so on. So there's intense competition between these little tyrannies. And it's partly driven by that, but it's mainly about public relations. And when you've got £700 billion to spend, and you're a small country, you might as well, I mean, you can buy paintings, which MBS famously did, though it may have been a forgery, and he spent hundreds of millions on it. You can buy all the yachts, you can buy all the chateaux, but there comes a point in which you can no longer consume that which you are buying. So it's public relations to make themselves look less ugly. Wayne, last word to you.
Well, it would also be perfect if they to stop people demonstrating outside BAE Systems.
Well, BAE Systems, of course, is deeply connected to Saudi Arabia. The Al Yamama deal is dealt with in some length in my Killings of Tony Blair documentary. I commend it to you. And the symbiotic relationship between politicians in Britain, BAE and the tyrannies in the Gulf is something to behold, I must tell you. Now, is this my last question of the night? In 1980, Margaret Thatcher made her most quoted speech. What was she not for doing? A, nationalising, B, turning, C, quitting. Interesting. After the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Now let me give you the phone numbers. If you're in the UK, the number is 08081 96 5522. It's entirely free nowadays. Ditto if you're in the United States. +1 844 944 3344.
They're looking up to the wrong role models, and that's what's causing them to get into gang culture and look up to folk that are stabbing and shooting each other.
That's why I love that picture on the front of The Voice of Sancho, of Sterling, of Saka, and of Rashford. I loved it because it showed young black boys, this is what you should aspire to.
Better than every other country.
Well, we are better than every other country.
Look in the mirror.
No, we are.
You're not treated.
Tell me a country that's better.
Yeah, but that means nothing to me.
Well, it may not. It's a fair point.
That means nothing to me and my children. At the end of the day, that is a white man's problem, a white woman's problem. It's about time you stop ignoring it and denying it and deal with it. You're causing a lot of harm.
I'm causing a lot of harm. Thank you for that call.
But
I'm sympathetic, Kieran, to that point of view, and I'm fully seized of the fact that there is sexual fluidity openly expressed now in a way that there wasn't when I was young, and I have no animus towards even people that like sex with pans. I just won't allow my 4-year-old. Or my 7-year-old or my 10-year-old to be filled with this at school.
That is a straw man. You show me a single teacher that can teach a 4-year-old child about sex. If you can show me that, I will ring the police before you.
Well, you may not be aware.
Prove me.
Kieran, you may not be aware. Kieran, let me speak. You may not be aware of the story that broke this week. Kieran, please be quiet for a minute.
Moats is the best. Keep going, George. It's the only way.
God bless you. No, as long as I've got breath, I'll keep going.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Mrs. Thatcher was famously not for turning. Are we heading to war with China? Yes, 37%. No, 63%. Although on YouTube, it's 49 yes, 51 no. It's no longer out of the question. I'm joined by the irascible, the spontaneous genius that is young James Giles. James, very nice to see you again.
Always a pleasure.
I'm glad that we can be in the studio rather than remotely. There's so much going on and not much time to deal with it. But let's deal with something that I take a counterintuitive view about. I see a lot of people attacking Boris Johnson for going on holiday for a week in Marbella. If I could get a flight tonight and go to Marbella, I'd be there. What's wrong with the Prime Minister after the difficulty he's had in this past 12 months, going on holiday? Discuss.
Well, look, Boris Johnson hasn't been on holiday now for over 18 months. In that time, he has steered the country through a global pandemic,
He's had
Not sure about the steering, but yeah, he's had to try.
He's tried he's tried a fair amount.
Yes.
He's had a baby, he's got married, there's a second baby on the way, he's almost died of coronavirus, let us not forget. And so a holiday's only fair.
And his mother died last week.
Well, indeed. So a holiday's only fair, but there are a good swathe of people who, no matter what Boris Johnson does, what he says, it will never be good enough. I mean, I think it's only fair that he takes a break now.
Well, you probably want your Prime Minister, your top ministers, not to be on the point of exhaustion. You probably want them to be refreshed by a week's holiday.
Well, you would think so.
Parliament's on holiday.
I was going to say, it's party conference season, so Parliament's not sitting, there are no votes, there are no debates. You know, the UUP are currently having their party conference for what it's worth. And Parliament will resume again in a few weeks' time, and by which point he'll be back from the Costa del Sol and he'll be back ready to provide some sort of leadership to the country.
To create some more mayhem. Now, the Tory government appears rather divided. I saw an exchange on the news today that I have literally, in more than 50 years in politics, I've never seen anything like it before. The business secretary, Kwasi, how do you say his second name?
Kwasi Kwarteng, yeah.
Kwasi Kwarteng said, full of praise he was, for Rishi Sunak, who he said was deeply involved with him in a lot of discussions about how we can handle this energy crisis and so on. And then Rishi Sunak's people immediately briefed the media to call the cabinet colleague a liar. And moreover, to say it's not the first time he's made these kind of things up.
Well, it was deeply embarrassing for the government that midway through a media round, you had the government mixing messages there. Kwasi, of course, having to change and say, well, I speak to the Treasury all the time. I've not asked Rishi anything specific about the energy crisis and support for business, but I'm always talking to Rishi, which, you know, is quite an embarrassing climb down, having just been on Sky previously saying, I'm speaking to Rishi, you know, he's backing business, I'm backing business. But it's symbolic of the Tory government for a start. As we discussed the other week, Boris Johnson promoting loyalty over competence. But it's also a case of, well, the boss is away, the minions just, you know, taking over the asylum, running riot, causing havoc.
Very interesting. Now, what about Special K? Let's explain this to those that aren't following as closely as we are. Keir Starmer claimed twice, it turns out, so it wasn't just a brain freeze. He did it twice. Claimed that he had been nicknamed, he was on a visit to the Kellogg's factory, which of course makes, amongst other products, Special K cereal. He said he had been nicknamed Special K all of his life, which turns out to be an untruth.
Well, it does. It turns out to be complete bull. Not only has he never been called Special K, be it the cereal Special K, or as he's said twice, K for Kia, you know, that never happened. And so, you know, you can understand, perhaps caught on the spot at the factory, you might want to make a joke about Special K if your name's Kia. But, you know, let us not forget, you know, some of our younger viewers, listeners here, you know, might also have a different meaning of the term Special K.
Oh, really? Tell me.
It is a slang term for ketamine, which is a drug which, you know, makes you a little bit woozy. And so, you know, perhaps on the benches when Keir Starmer is there, you know, a little bit comatose, not providing a robust opposition, then, you know, maybe he has had a bit of Special K. Who knows?
I never knew that. I'm obviously not in the young category. That is complete news to me. Well, that makes it even more embarrassing.
Well, it does. It really does.
Keir Starmer spoke for 90 minutes at the Labour conference, and his approval ratings have not moved upwards by one scintilla. What does that tell you?
Well, I think it's of great concern. If you look at the polling after Boris and Keir's speeches from focus groups that were made and paid, in fact, to sit and watch both. These are politically representative focus groups. more people actually agreed with what Keir Starmer had to say than what Boris Johnson had to say. But it's all in the presentation. It's that will get you over the line. And Keir Starmer has just reinforced the public persona of someone who's boring, failed to challenge the government, and not being a strong leader, which at the moment, I think more than for a long time, the country is crying out for. And if you contrast that to Boris Johnson, who has had a pretty turbulent 18 months since the election into government, you know, with completely haphazard, incompetent ministers, he's still able to go up there, give it the bar, give it the bluster. And, you know, the Tory faithful lap it up, and the public see him as a bit of a character still, which is how he won the mayoralty, it's how he's become Prime Minister. And until Labour fully understand themselves what they stand for, where they're going, what they want to do, we're going to be stuck with the Tories in power without a strong opposition.
Now, we had fun with the appointment of Nadine Dorries. You'll remember you stumbled upon her, what we'll call the camel toe interview, which we didn't intend any disrespect, but which has taken wings and flown across the world. She is now in charge of what happened to the BBC. And she made a speech which I must say I agreed with every word of, in which she demolished the BBC. She demolished their, the extent to which they are completely contemptuous of the great mass of the British people. You know that old phrase, PLU, people like us? The BBC speaks to people like them. But the problem is, it's the rest of us that are paying for it, at least up till now. I get a feeling that Nadine Dorries is out to get the BBC.
Well, I think she is, and, you know, it's really the dying days for the BBC. You know, they've got the gall to be making a documentary about Jimmy Savile, which
unbelievable. I
really
can hardly believe
takes
that.
the biscuit.
They're going to make a documentary about one of their flagship presenters for decades, who was on their premises and on their dime, committing horrific sexual crimes against, I don't want to go into details, but living and dead people.
Yes, quite.
This man, you would have thought the last thing in the world the BBC would want to do would be to bring all that up again.
Well, absolutely, but I think it speaks to the fact that, you know, some in the BBC, I think, do expect this to be their end of an era. You know, this is a swan song for them. It's the end. They know the gig is up, their days are numbered. And so, you know, perhaps they are embarking on these rather odd projects because they know that Nadine Dorries and the Tory government have it in for them. And why wouldn't they, frankly? You know, everybody in Britain that watches TV has to pay a ghastly sum to a corporation that fewer and fewer people are actually watching and paying attention to. It seems grossly unfair. And I'm all in favour of defunding the BBC, either moving it over to an ad-supported model or making it Netflix-style. You know, there are people in the country who want to watch the BBC's output. I'm not one of them, but I'm sure there are people out there, and good luck to them. But don't make me pay for, you know, not watching content. It's ridiculous.
Let's hear from Phil, who's in Bristol. Go ahead, Phil.
Yes, hi, George. Thank you very much for your show.
Welcome.
Yes, I want to talk about how the CV-19, the COVID-19 story, that's kind of filtering out there, but really hasn't made much of an impact. So now we're finding out that CV-19 was a artificially human-made virus. And this is coming out now in the Daily Telegraph, it's in the Times, that was made in the Wuhan lab with funds from the US and China. Have you been following this story, George?
I have. I don't think it's established as fact yet, but it's disturbing. The thing turns on the fact that COVID-19 is not comparable to any other coronavirus or any other naturally occurring virus, that it was being worked on by American scientists and Chinese scientists with a view to developing an immunity from it. It's deep, it's complicated, it's not established fact yet, Phil, but it's food for a rather disturbing thought.
Right. Well, in 2020, I don't know if you've heard of Professor Francis Boyle. He's an expert in biowarfare. He's a professor of international law at the University of Belfast.
I know him well, yeah. He's not a scientist, he's a lawyer, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, but he specializes in biowarfare. He wrote the US version of it that was made into domestic law.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that in 2020, he said that COVID-19 was made with gain of function, and he was laughed at. His YouTube interview was taken down. And to me, this is all an expression of people who are laughed at, and then suddenly they find out, wow, well, maybe there's something to it. So, I don't know if your viewers will know this expression of gain of function, but I think we need to talk about it. We will.
Of course, we're always ready to talk about COVID. What we're not ready to be is a platform for dangerous crankism, because sometimes people are described as being nutters because they are nutters. It's not the case that every conspiracy theorist is really onto a conspiracy. This one, I've granted you, is food for thought. The Chinese deny it. The Wuhan laboratory denies it. The World Health Organization has said that this was not from a lab. We'll keep it under review, Phil. And we'll always be ready to look again at previous positions that we've taken. Thanks very much for the call. Jalal is in Manchester. Go ahead, Jalal.
Hi, George.
Hi.
George, you always say follow the money.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that nobody is following all these senators and politicians being paid money by corporations, be it the military complex, be it Amazon, Walmart, Asda, whoever, that pay lobbying money and contributions towards elections? Why is it that nobody investigates as to how they're paid, how these politicians hide the money, and why they're paid this money? It's easy to follow because every corporation has an account, does their accounts, and they have to show where the money came in and where it went out. So why is nobody investigating?
Most corporations are not donating heavily to the British political process. American, yes, but as James will tell you, as already an experienced election agent and campaign organizer, the amount of money spent in British elections and allowed to be spent in British elections is very small by comparison to other countries, especially, of course, to the United States. And by and large, corporations don't give significant sums of money to political parties. What the real corruption is the revolving door, where retiring politicians, and they retire at an ever younger age, go through that revolving door and end up on the boards of these corporations, some of whom have benefited mightily. Let me bring in James. James, your view on that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that corporations do take on retiring politicians, cabinet ministers, etc. And that's why the government introduced a register whereby for a period of 5 years after a cabinet minister steps down from their position, they have to OK any appointments that they take on. Take George Osborne as an example. I lost track of the number of jobs he took on after leaving Parliament. Advisor to BlackRock, rather famously editor of the Evening Standard for a period. I got as far as 6 jobs, and there's probably more, but I gave up counting after 6. And, you know, these people earn fortune after their time in office, and that is of concern because, obviously, if you're in a position of power, you know things from your time as, for instance, Secretary of State for Energy. And if you go on to advise an energy company, that could give them an unfair advantage.
And you may be making political decisions with an eye on what is going to happen once you leave politics, rather than both eyes on the issue in hand. Jalal, go ahead. Last word to you.
How would voters react if they found that people that they had voted for in the past, while they were in the job that they were in, i.e. in politics, were earning so much money outside of politics
But
while in politics?
they're not. I'm sorry to shoot your fox, but they're not. Anything that you earn when you're a member of parliament, you have to register it. And if you are found not to have registered it, you would be drummed out of parliament if it was a significant sum of money. So it's actually not right what you're saying, Jalal.
It's either that or get paid $500,000 for a painting.
Who got paid $500,000 for a painting?
Was it not pictures? His pictures started at $500,000 or something like that.
Who?
Hunter Biden.
Oh, you're talking about the United States. I was talking about Britain. In the United States, corruption with a capital C is right at the heart of the political process. Thanks for the call, Jalal. Let's go to Miles in London. Go ahead, Miles.
Evening, George.
Hi.
Hi. George, the CIA plots that Mike Pompeo orchestrated or oversaw, that's getting reasonable coverage. But in my view, that's not really the legal Achilles heel for the U.S. prosecution case. It's the Thordarson lied issue. It's the key witness issue that lied, and there's documentary proof that he lied. And he was referred to 22 times in the written verdict in January. So that's really the story that the press should be covering, not the sort of...
Well, they're not covering either story.
They're covering the CIA plots more than they are.
Well, I don't know where you've seen it. I haven't seen it anywhere except online. Did the BBC cover it? I think not.
No.
Neither the BBC, nor ITV, nor Channel 4. I didn't see it in any of the mainstream newspapers.
Yeah, some of the American press covered it. I would like to see his lawyers walk into the appeal hearing on the October 27th and just say, this is a mess. Stop it right here.
Move for dismissal, yeah. Move for dismissal, yeah. Well, obviously, it's up to the lawyers, but that thought does occur to me, Miles.
Are you coming to the protest on October 27th in London?
I won't be, but I'll be covering it on here and on television generally very, very much. Miles, thanks for the call. Josh is in Cincinnati in the United States. What's not to love?
Hey, thanks
Cincinnati.
for taking my call.
Go ahead, Josh.
Hey, Cincinnati's great. Hope you guys are good.
I used to know the mayor of it, a certain Jerry Springer.
Oh, my goodness. Yes.
he took
Anyhow,
me
he's
to
legendary
breakfast
here.
once. He took me to breakfast in the run-up to the Iraq War. He was a big opponent of the Iraq War, actually.
Oh, it doesn't surprise me. It was a bad war, if there's a good one.
Yeah.
So I got a question about not Jerry Springer, about Jeffrey Epstein. You got me there.
Yeah.
Here in the United States, it's just really hard to get information on it. You'd think it would be like the biggest story in the world, I guess. Ostensibly Israeli intelligence pouring out children. The Ghislaine Maxwell documents are sealed. Before they got sealed, they were saying an 11-year-old girl was being trafficked. And this has roped in people like Prince Andrew and who knows how many U.S. politicians. Do you hear anything about this, and what's your opinion on it?
First of all, Prince Andrew is not accused of anything to do with an 11-year-old girl. We need to make that clear. In fact, he's accused of having had sex with a woman of an age that would be legal in Britain, and that is one of the complications of the Prince Andrew case. The offence would have occurred in the United States when she was being trafficked, if she was, for that purpose, that illicit and illegal purpose. Epstein was clearly an intelligence asset, if not an agent. I don't know why you want to bundle it off to the Israelis. He was almost certainly working for American intelligence, as well as other intelligence services, perhaps including the Israelis. Ehud Barak, former military chief and former Prime Minister of Israel, was a close buddy of his and a frequent visitor to his premises. Epstein had a black book in which almost everybody who was anybody in politics, in business, was listed, and a very large number of them were inexplicably drawn into his company and found it very convenient and convivial indeed. So we cover this story regularly, Josh. We've had several guests talk on it, and we're not going to let it go, not least because of the Ghislaine Maxwell involvement. Thanks very much for your call. James, it's funny how some stories cross the Atlantic in a big way and some don't. You know, if it had been, I don't know, a Jerry Springer type thing, everybody in Britain would know about it. But the Epstein case, apart from us, isn't really widely known or discussed over here. Why?
Well, it's a difficult one, really, isn't it? Because, of course, British media is much more heavily regulated than American media, at least on television and radio, which is still where the majority of our news output comes from in Britain. In America, you can say what you want, give or take.
Unless you're Donald Trump.
Well, indeed, and then you get banned by Nick Clegg, of all people. But
the Liberal.
The Liberal Nick Clegg, of course. But GB News is perhaps, to a small extent, bucking that trend. They argue that what they're offering is opinion rather than news. And the introduction of Talk TV next year, Piers Morgan's and Murdoch's new channel, in effect, will surely shake things up a little bit. And we might begin to see an Americanization, if I can use, if that is a word, of British news.
It is funny because the story we did last week with Professor Andrew Loney, the author of many books on Lord Mountbatten, was easily our most viewed clip ever. Hundreds of thousands of people watched it. So there is an audience for diving deep into the things that the other media will not touch. And I think we're filling that bill.
Absolutely.
Oh, Norma in Bristol on the line. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. Not much time. I'm not really clever enough to understand all these intricacies of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, but it was easier to get to grips with the apartheid in South Africa. But what I want to know is that the situation in Israel regarding Palestinians is so wrong, and it's been like it for years. And why don't the Western nations cry out for freedom for the Palestinians?
Well, they didn't cry out for freedom for the South Africans either.
Well,
they backed
but
the Western. Well, eventually, in the last 24 months or so. But even in my lifetime in Parliament, it was routine to hear the Prime Minister describe Nelson Mandela himself as a terrorist. So Britain and the United States clung to their support for the apartheid state in South Africa for a very, very long time. And in the case of the Palestinians, it is complicated further by the geopolitical interest that Western countries have in Israel, as they did with apartheid South Africa, but the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jewish people were systematically annihilated. And if Hitler hadn't been stopped, all of the Jews in Europe would have been annihilated. Make this story much more difficult for politicians, journalists, and the rest to talk about. And so it's too late in the day to have a proper discussion on it. But thanks, Norma. We always need to hear your voice. Are we heading to war with China? Well, 62% of you say no. I hope you're right. See you next week.